theme and title of our seminar today is The Sense of Belonging and the Physicality of Architecture, the Interaction of Psychology and Materiality seminar. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jihan Salim. I'm the Hoffman Wood Professor of Architecture at the School of Civil Engineering at the University of Leeds. I'm also the Deputy Director of Leeds Social Sciences Institute, and I'm the founder of the Architecture and Urbanism Research Group in the school. Once again, I'm extremely delighted to have you all together today to join the seminar, and we have a high number of registrations, so this is really good news for all of us. I would just like to start today by a brief introduction about the Architecture and Urbanism Group and how it was founded, which, as I mentioned, I founded it in 2018, and we already have over 23 members in the group between PhD students, early career researchers, and peers and academics across the university. We are a multidisciplinary group, and we're interested in conducting research and practice in architecture in relation to the built environment. So we do understand architecture as a human and societal construct that covers a broad spectrum of social, cultural, and technical outcomes around historic buildings and objects, and hence our interest is in creative exploration of the relationship between the processes and the products of architectural practice as a human aspect. So our research really actually ranges from architectural to urban design interpretations, policies and guidelines, up to interventions and engagement on a grassroots level as well. We share a commitment to sustainable development as well in the work we do. So we're motivated by the desire to achieve significant impact in local contexts where we work. The group actually leads a couple of pioneering projects spanning across multiple cities in the global south with a wider umbrella to respond to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which represents our actual aspiration for a lot of the work that we do. We are very active in hosting and delivering public engagement events, and this is one example. We also do multiple conferences, seminars, workshops, training, and policy toolkits to provide opportunities for networking and scholarly exchange and development. And we have particular focus on supporting early career researchers and PhD students in these fields. So, sorry, the seminar today is designed with an emphasis on the theme of belonging and students' experiences in higher education institutions. Particularly, we're focusing on the era and the period coming after the COVID, which was a tense period of lockdown and online teaching and learning during the COVID pandemic, and its implication in forcing various restrictions such as social distancing, strict access to educational spaces, and switching to online education. And hence we found that there is a strong need to revisit the meaning, the value, and the materialization of vital and important concepts such as space and sense of belonging in higher education institutions. We are exploring how the physicality of educational spaces and their interaction with human perception contribute to augmenting the sense of belonging, specifically looking at the cohort of undergraduate students in higher education academies, and demonstrate how the spatial matters really matter, and hence the materiality of architecture is very important for us. The interpretation of belonging also can be found in the wide range of multidisciplinary scholarship, and in this seminar we propose 3 themes to engage with and dig deeper into the understanding of belonging. The first one is the conceptualization of the sense of belonging, where it's related to the connections that we need to develop as human beings. And it is associated to interaction, to connections, and with identification with others. These are attached with ourselves, with our human beings, and with the places and spaces we live in. Hence, the question is, how do we relate belonging with other disciplines? The second is belonging and space, and there is a strong association between the physical and material aspects and the relation of factors between them. How do they interact together, and what associates each one with the other one? And in that discourse, space is essential for people to develop connection since it presents itself as the material entity that hosts our everyday activity. And hence the question we ask is, how can buildings be designed to improve our belongingness? And third is architecture and psychology, where we find a strong relation between both of them. Physical spaces, either indoor or outdoor, act on people's behavior. Spaces cannot be containers that do not have an active participation in our day life. Hence, our question is that how can we make intersections between architecture and psychology? So, as I mentioned, this is our fourth seminar organized by our student, amazing student, Karen. Karen is here and is related to the research on her research on sense of belonging in higher education institutions. So we are so excited that we have received a wide interest from scholars and early career researchers from across the world and the UK as well, not only from the UK, but actually we have amazing international outreach as well. And you will see that in the range of speakers and talks we're going to have today. We hope the seminar is a great platform for exchanging ideas, theories, practices, and case studies, and will help building a network of researchers sharing common interest on ideas and notions of belonging and space as well. Many thanks for your contributions all of you and sharing your work from many cultural perspectives. This is actually the essence and the value of running seminars like that. We need to look at best practice. We need to understand and engage with other practices that's happening around the world and learn from each other and exchange that knowledge. We appreciate the opportunity to virtually connect with you from many parts of the world and exchange that knowledge. So as you will see from the program today and from the number of participants, we have a full house event and a long lineup of speakers today. So I will not take much time and go any further, but I wish to welcome our keynote speakers who are joining us today. Louise Banahene from the University of Leeds. I think Louise joined us already. Okay, hi Louise, good morning. Dr. McCrone from Imperial College London. Dr. Debra Cureton from Wolverhampton University. So really thank you to all of you for accepting our invitation and being here with us today for your valuable talks. As you see from the program on the screen, we have two main sessions. The first panel includes presentations about the spatial implications of belonging, and the second panel will discuss the spatial and psychological dimensions of belonging. At the end of each panel, we will have a Q&A session, so please save your questions for that session. Feel free to use the chat box as well to include any questions, and we will pick this up during the Q&A session to answer as many as we can. Also, feel free if you want to tweet about the event today. There are two accounts that you can on the Twitter that you can use. It's the Architecture and Urbanism Research Group Twitter account, which is the first one, and the second one is related to the Places of Belonging project. You can also use this one. We also have a LinkedIn page called Leeds Architecture and Urbanism Research if you want to hashtag that as well or to tag it. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our first keynote speaker, and I will be chairing the rest of the session. But once again, welcome everybody, and I hope you enjoy the day. I will unshare my screen now. Louise. Hi, good morning, Louise. You're on mute.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes. Hi, good morning. Lovely to have you today.
Hi, it's really nice to be here. So my name is Louise Banahene. I'm Director of Educational Engagement at the University of Leeds. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Are you okay that I introduce you?
Yes.
Yes, all right. Do you have any slides to share?
I do. I will do that now.
Right, okay. So until Louise will share, Louise Banahene is Director of Educational Engagement at the University of Leeds. She provides leadership on the university's access and student success strategy, including outreach, contextual admissions, and change to structures and process to close gaps in continuation and degree awarding gaps. In 2017, she was awarded an MBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours for services to higher education, Her external role includes chair of the NEON Postgraduate Diversity Working Group and expert panel member of the UCRI OFS funded widening participation in postgraduate study program. Thank you very much, Louise, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Marvellous, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to start with an apology because this probably won't be as polished as I had intended, because literally about 3 minutes before I joined, my laptop completely died. So I have joined via my child's laptop and my phone. And minus the slides that I had intended to use, but luckily I do have one that I can use, so hopefully this will still resonate with you. So I wanted to spend the next few minutes really just talking to you about why at the University of Leeds we want to ensure that the university is a place where all students matter, but also why that matters irrespective of the university and the organisation. So to give you a little bit of context there. So it's not a million miles away from what I had intended to present on. It's perhaps just not quite as personalised as I'd planned from the outset. So at the University of Leeds, just to give some context, I mean, I know many of you are from institutions as well, but as a research intensive university, we have a diverse group of students, both internationally and from the UK. We're also a city-based university, and so in many ways that should mean that we are set up to be able to provide that welcoming experience for students. But the reason why we have an access and student success strategy, and a lot of this work has come out of that, is because that we recognise that despite that there are still challenges that remain, and that we need to be intentional in the way in which we embed belonging, and that applies to all aspects of the experience, not just for students but also for staff as well. And for us, this is something that has been a journey for the last 2 or 3 years, and the work that you're going to be discussing today and thinking about and hearing from colleagues from across the sector on is really key to that. We really feel that it's important for us to think about that whole student experience, but particularly thinking about that physical environment as well. So for us, in terms of thinking about, well, what does that mean in terms of belonging and the physical environment, we've placed it really at the centre of the work that we do right across the institution. So at the top, we have our strategic plan, and within that, we set out our commitment to ensuring that our students and staff feel like they belong here. And then those messages in terms of the way in which we embed belonging run through both our international student education and our research plans, but they actually run through all the related strategies, including a really key component of that, which isn't on here, but it's also thinking about our education spaces and thinking about the way in which they do or don't ensure that our students feel like they belong. So before we go into, I suppose, what we mean by that, I just wanted to set the context in a little bit more detail, because as I said, it is an increasingly diverse group of students coming into higher education. But in order to be able to ensure that our students feel like they can succeed, we do need to think about who is advantaged, who has privilege within that, and what are some of the systemic and structural changes that we need to make. And really implicit within that is an acknowledgement that higher education was designed for a far more homogenous group of students, and I suppose a much narrower sector of society. So for us to be able to enhance and increase momentum, we do need to think about that in a very holistic way, thinking about what we mean by belonging, and actually going further than that and thinking about what does it mean to feel that you matter and that you are valued, both as a student, but actually as a member of staff as well. So when we're talking about that, we're thinking about a whole range of different students. And I think what's relevant here in the context of this seminar is acknowledging that for us to be able to design spaces, we do need to intentionally think about the needs of specific groups. And really, we can employ an inclusive targeting approach. So if we design with marginalised groups in mind, then we will benefit all groups of students. So there's some examples at the bottom of this slide here, but I think it doesn't matter which group we're thinking about. It's really recognising who are from underserved and underrepresented communities and who would benefit from us redesigning our spaces and our physical spaces, as well as the broader aspect of the environment that our students are operating in. So on this slide, this sets out what the university's vision is in this space. So as a university, we have committed that the University of Leeds will be a place where students from diverse backgrounds feel like they belong, they can thrive and are valued for their unique contribution. And as we were developing the strategy, we did a lot of consultation, not just with staff, but also with students as well, and really talked to them about what they felt in this space. And our starting point was actually thinking about, I suppose, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and acknowledging how important, once you've established the basic needs, how do you build on that to ensure that students feel like they can belong and they can thrive. And through the course of that, what we found was that really for our students, there isn't a silver bullet. There are a huge number of factors that come into play that influence whether a student feels like they belong or they feel like they're valued. So that included recognition of the interaction between students, so peer-to-peer with staff, the relationship with the curriculum, but also that wider physical environment. So a really stark reminder of that was when we did some focus groups with commuter students, for example. So at the university, they aren't there. I suppose they aren't in the majority, but they are a really significant and growing minority of students. And when we talked to those students, they would say, they gave examples of where they didn't feel like they belong. So, for example, the way in which when they had come into the university and travelled by public transport, they didn't actually have anywhere to leave their belongings. They
Louise,
talked about the challenges. Oh, sorry.
My apologies to interrupt you, but we can't see your slides.
Oh, you can't see them?
No, we can't see them.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. My apologies for interrupting you.
No, thank you for letting me know. Hang on a minute. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. So yes, speaking about commuter students, so they talked about their experience of commuting into the university and the way in which they felt like they didn't belong, but also the way in which their voice wasn't always necessarily heard in this space. And I suppose connecting that to the extent to which students felt like they could thrive, it also came into, I suppose, a very stark reminder when students who were travelling by public transport described just how early they needed to leave to be able to access the physical spaces, particularly when there was an expectation that they were able to arrive on campus for examinations at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so for us, in terms of thinking about what this means as a vision and how we might change things for our students, it was really important that we were able to recognise the need to change all aspects of that experience for our students. So we set out the vision for this, and we've had a number of different ways in which we have been able to enact this and move it forward. So I suppose just taking a few examples. So the first one has been just the importance of an evidence-based approach to being able to embed belonging and think about what belonging means for our students. So that has meant that we've been able to support both staff and students to undertake research thinking about a really wide range of aspects of belonging. So everything from belonging within physical environment, but also thinking about it in terms of what it means for some of those underserved communities, what it means in terms of interactive pedagogies, the relationship with the curriculum and how that can support students to feel like they can belong, and also what do we mean by mattering as well, and what do we mean by belonging in that space. That's been supported alongside that and that research, which has been everything from the use of early career researchers and PhD students to student research internships to create a community. And that community has really helped us to reflect and consider how do we enact and how do we support that cultural change, so that we're able to ensure that colleagues who are thinking about the physical environment and the effect of that physical environment are working with colleagues or students who are also thinking about it from other perspectives, so that we can identify key drivers for change. It's been able to facilitate not just conversations and dialogue, which is really important, but change. And in that cultural change curve, there is that recognition of understanding why belonging and mattering and being valued is important, but also what our role is within that. And so in doing that, as well as raising awareness and being able to use the evidence to identify what's changing and what needs to change, there's also been a lot of work to enable colleagues to understand what an individual's role is within that. So thinking about not just the way in which we teach or the way in which we enact the student experience, but the spaces that we inhabit, and who holds power, who holds privilege within those spaces. We've been able to support that through not just action planning and governance, but also really creating safe spaces for those discussions. And an important dimension of that has come to the fore has been really the discussion that came up quite early on, which was, if we are to create spaces where our students feel like they belong, then we also need to feel like we belong. Our staff need to feel like they are part of the community. And actually what really came out of that was that there were some groups of staff who really felt that that wasn't as easy as they had envisaged when they had started in a higher education institution. So it's really helped us to think about what are those spaces and what do they look like for our staff, but how do we support that? How do we embed that belonging and create new communities for people to come together and to think through what they need to do? So the Access and Student Success Strategy covers a number of different pillars. So we're thinking about access, continuation, attainment, and progression. But if I just go back to that strategy and I suppose the summary of all of it, belonging and the role of space within that really cuts across all four of those pillars and really sits under the enablers as well. It's absolutely crucial that we think about it in all aspects of it, and we think about it in a holistic way to be able to support change. And that's why I'm delighted that you're here today thinking about that and thinking about what this means for students, but also for what are the next stages of this work in this space. The final point that I wanted to end on was we talked about how important evidence is and the research is, but collaboration has also been really key here. Being able to work both between staff and students, but also cross-institutionally and between universities has been incredibly important. We wouldn't have been able to achieve the work that we have done to date had it not been for that collaborative working, which often involved staff and students, but also sometimes the power of professional services and academic staff, and sometimes bringing together groups that didn't always work together has been hugely powerful, as has working with staff as well from other universities. So for us, we're really pleased and delighted to be able to collaborate and to be able to continue that. And I hope that the outcomes of this seminar are that we are able to build on that and to be able to learn from the work that's going on across the sector and identify new ways in which to be able to collaborate. So I just wanted to end by saying thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of the seminar, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very, very much, Louise, for your time and the valuable presentation today. And I think it's really important to highlight the excessive and amazing work happening across University of Leeds on the ideas and notions of belonging from multiple angles and multiple disciplines. And really, I'm really delighted to be part of that work as well. We can see some glimpse of good impact on the way. So hopefully we will be able to reflect more on how this is progressing and have more events like this to deliver that impact and know more about other work happening across institutional. Thank you very much, Louise. Is there any questions for Louise? I know that, Louise, are you able to stay with us or you have to leave?
Yeah, no, I can stay with you for a bit longer.
Any questions for Louise before we move to the next talk? Any questions? Okay, if there's anything that appears in during that time, please put it in the chat box, and we still have Louise with us. Thank you once again very much. Thank you very much, Louise, for your talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're going to move now to our first session, the spatial implications of belonging. And we will kick off that session with our first keynote speaker, Dr. Luc McCrone, who is a research associate in the Center for Higher Education Research and Scholarship. His long-standing interest in the student experience developed from his time as an Imperial engineering student, deputy president for education and hall warden. Luc explored student engagement with transnational learning spaces in his PhD and has fed into the subsequent redesign of campus spaces. He is recently working on 2 institutional research projects, including the Belonging, Engagement and Community Project, and is increasingly interested in the relationship between learning spaces and sense of belonging. Luc, the floor is yours, and if you have any slides to share, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor Salim. I'm just going to try sharing my screen now. Fantastic. Can I just confirm everyone can see my slides?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to deliver a keynote presentation, a really exciting and relevant seminar event. My name is Luc McCrone, and like my colleague Julianne Viola, who sadly couldn't join us today, I'm a research associate at the Centre for Higher Education Research and Scholarship at Imperial College London. And we work on 2 institutional projects investigating student-centred belonging at Imperial. Today's talk will involve me introducing some of the research from my PhD, which focused on student engagement with learning spaces, in addition to the more recent institutional research into belonging. The presentation shouldn't take any longer than sort of 15 to 20 minutes, and I, of course, welcome comments or questions at the end. So it's widely accepted among research in higher education sector that belonging is central to the university experience. It's been linked to positive academic outcomes, including higher grades and student engagement, as well as things like self-confidence and acceptance. Belonging is a concept that is broadly defined and experienced, and it is an individual experience. Yet whilst belonging can be very different for each individual, the question of where students belong is arguably a question of space and the meaning they make of that space. Added to this, space is not merely a neutral physical container, but we know from sociospatial theory that it's imbued with symbolic messages, which indicate how people should behave, feel, and interact. And the fact that time, space, and belonging are not fixed, uniform, or discrete, but instead interweaving, relational, and with a multiplicity of meanings, requires us to develop more nuanced, situated conceptualizations of belonging. So what's shaping the findings and thinking which I'm going to be sharing today? Firstly, the institutional context, Imperial College, is a STEM MB research-intensive urban university, which in 2017 developed and committed to a learning and teaching strategy, which really set the direction for transformation of curriculum, pedagogy and spaces, with a move to more student-centered discovery-based learning and greater emphasis on diversity and inclusion. It also set in motion initiatives like our Student Shaper scheme, where students can partner in education design. On a more personal level, the empirical and anecdotal experiences which have shaped my personal lens and positioning include my hall wardening experience, where I've supported fresher students in halls and have acquired a better understanding of the way students engage with different residential spaces. Then my PhD research, which focused on student engagement with transitions within and between formal and informal learning spaces. And finally, the BEC, otherwise known as Belonging, Engagement and Community Project, which I'll talk a bit more about now. So the BEC project is longitudinal in the sense that we interview students from all levels of study, and we also offer the opportunity for those students to engage in follow-up interviews. The project's been running since 2019, so we have a pre and post-COVID capture. It's adopted mixed methods, including an annual survey and semi-structured interviews with students. We did use walking interviews, otherwise known as place-based interviews, prior to COVID. This allowed us to better understand student meaning making of space and the spaces which are significant to them within their sense of belonging. And the data here really gives an impression of the body of data which I'll be drawing from today, showing a fairly consistent participation in both the survey and interviews throughout COVID. If any of you are interested in learning more about the BEC project, you can navigate to our information webpage with the QR code.
Luke, I think the QR code is not working. So just if you would like to provide it later, that would be great.
Absolutely, Professor Salim. Yeah, I'll put it in the chat for everyone afterwards. Thank you. So it's worth us now just reflecting on some of the challenges and opportunities associated with the topic we're discussing today. First, how we think about the increasingly complex relationships between space, user ownership, and belonging, especially within a changing hybrid learning context. Then how we can garner nuanced accounts of students' belonging to create inclusive spaces, including by contesting traditional notions of belonging to promote belonging for marginalized groups. And finally, how we support students to make more productive connections between different spaces, contexts, and people. And whilst there are several useful sociospatial theories which can be taken from the world of sociology and geography, my PhD thinking led me to supplement these with ecological theory, popularized by Ronald Barnett and Norman Jackson in their book, Ecologies for Learning and Practice. A learning ecology is a place where learning and the environment are indivisible. And by environment, we not only mean the physical environments we sense and perceive, but also the fertile environments we create in our minds. Belonging and learning both seem to rely upon the way in which students interpret and make meaning of different spaces and situations. This relies upon them connecting their previous knowledge funds and experiences to situated learning. And as stated in the previous slide, our first challenge is finding a way to conceptualize the physical, temporal, and cognitive spaces that sit between observable moments of learning or activity and the spaces where that learning is connected to or transferred, i.e. scalable learning. That is learning that extends beyond the defined content and knowledge boundaries of that particular instance. We might consult ecological theory to identify the ecotone metaphor, which can help us to imagine and understand this in-between complexity, tension, and transition. In nature, like in the diagram, ecotones are spaces in and of themselves between which two ecosystems, for example, an ocean and river environment, overlap. However, they are not only zones of transition, but also zones of conflict and tension, in which a higher abundance of species is able to survive and thrive. In the coming slides, I will present data and cases where this ecotone might be applicable and helpful in practice for understanding the link between space, learning, and belonging in different contexts. Just before delving into some of those examples of spaces and data which have some relation to this ecotone thinking, this timeline gives an overview of how student social connection changed from just before to during to just after the pandemic, based on our analysis of the BEC research data. Just before COVID, the year was really characterized by a space to connect and socialize. Following that, as COVID emerged, a space and year of disconnection and feelings of isolation, then a year of restored appreciation for in-person connection, and in the most recent year, as having to navigate connection in a hybrid setting. We might start even by applying the ecotone idea and concept to this very timeline, by thinking about how the tension of connection and disconnection between two conflicting periods, pre and post COVID, created a space for innovation and adaptation. I'll begin by progressing to some space case studies now which correspond to the 2019 to 20 year, i.e. pre-COVID. And first looking at a space which the institution has strategically invested in to better support formal collaborative learning, the introduction of Connect booth seating, as can be seen in the photo, in what was originally a raked row-by-row lecture theatre, really helped to transform this space. And in evaluating this space during my PhD, including with some comparison to the mirrored lecture theatre opposite, which had very similar pre-renovation row-by-row configuration, it became clear that the booths became interesting shared group learning spaces, which first heightened student ownership, both for students personally and in groups, allowed students to take risks in their learning and to share that risk in a perceivably safer space. And the booths almost became micro ecotones between student groups and the teacher, who could use the space as accessible walkways to roam and interact with the booth groups. Transitions in how the students and teachers behaved and perceived one another were observed and reported in interviews, shifting from teachers being seen as what students referred to as guardians of module credit pre-renovation to approachable helpers post-renovation. There is evidence that this heightened ownership during timetable periods also led students to using the space during non-timetable periods, unlike the pre-renovation lecture theatre. However, in wanting to understand transitions within and between learning spaces, my data analysis directed me to looking at the informal space directly adjacent to the lecture theatre to understand the transitions into and out of that timetabled learning. Although tired and unthoughtful in its design, as seen in the photo, this informal space was nonetheless used by students and lecturers for important pre- and post-timetabled lecture interactions. These observations gave some insight into the serendipity that incidentally occurred before and after in-person lectures, and that was arguably and unfortunately lost to remote online learning. And following the evaluation of the lecture theatre and that pre-renovation informal space at a later point as we neared COVID, we partnered with students and staff from the department to redesign this informal space to better support transition into and out of both lecture theatres. This was part of our efforts to create spaces which enable engagement with discovery-based learning and movement through liminality, including the sharing and management of the emotion associated with that difficult learning and transition. It is within these very finite transitions that students connect over a shared activity and are able to almost calibrate their emotion with others about that activity. Based on these space evaluations and the ecotone thinking, classrooms might even be expanded in their definition to include adjacent transitional spaces, which together might be thought of ecologically as a transitional zone, a place where students go to learn and discover, to connect to each other, and to belong in a sort of ecotone, which is potentially inclusive of a broad and more heterogeneous group of students. Transitional zones may also honour the aforementioned importance of scalable learning, which is learning that extends beyond the duration of the particular instance of situated learning. Supporting student and teacher transition from users to designers can help them to also occupy a sort of design ecotone, which, as shown in the adapted diagram, not only changes the space design output, but facilitates an important transition and role from students being mere passive learners to design partners. By creating spaces and opportunities within which students can shape their environment, as opposed to merely being shaped by it, we found significantly enhanced their sense of ownership in the redesigned spaces and in general. Whilst the states or departments can provide well-designed spaces, there is no assurance that students will A, use them meaningfully, and B, have a sense of ownership and agency within them. This partnership approach is, however, most successful when involving what Don Norman calls a translational designer to help guide these student partners and staff partners through the more technical aspects of the process. The accounts from the quote from this student shaper really speaks volumes in terms of them having the ability and opportunity to make long-lasting impact, and engaging in this project being one of their university highlights. In drawing now from a few anecdotes from our Beck belonging research, this quote takes us back to the physical transitional space and the idea that students report contrast and transition between what they call more professional settings and then informal settings where they can have lunch together or reflect on the professional formal experiences. COVID possibly forced us to appreciate the importance of movement between formal and informal spaces, given the social connections and opportunities that exist between. This student highlighted, firstly, that it was really tough to meet anyone during the first year of COVID, and that they only met 3 to 4 people during the whole year. They then emphasized how the combination of professional and informal settings and potentially the predictive transitions between those are really what matter. Engaging remotely and not having these same physical and social transitions clearly had detrimental impact on the student sense of belonging. Halls of residences were also spaces identified by participants, including retrospectively, as spaces within which students navigate significant life transitions and form deep bonds with fellow residents as a result. Halls broadly are unique because they allow students to form interdisciplinary connections outside of departments, and therefore may be considered as a sort of interdisciplinary ecotone. Students also reported having a unique sense of ownership in halls, notably in spaces like hall kitchens, which provide a reason for people to come together and connect over a common activity. Spaces like this, which enable students to connect their personal interests and needs to that of the group within a safe ecotone, are really important. And for this third-year student, they stated how they made friends from completely different backgrounds to themselves, who they went on to live with in private accommodation. We published some of this thinking around belonging in halls in a wonky article, if any of you are interested in checking that out. To now summarize and wrap up some of this thinking around understanding, conceptualizing, and designing for belonging in space. First is just reflecting on theory and thinking ecologically is my first suggestion when trying to better understand the relationship between space and belonging. This spirit of ecological thinking also makes us consider how factors such as socioeconomic status, gender, language, culture, religion, and disability interact in a complex and dynamic way. Thinking in this way also allows us to focus on how process and context can leverage the funds of knowledge that learners bring with them to educational settings to enrich the context within which learning occurs and to ultimately improve accessibility for marginalized groups. Secondly, is just thinking about the design approach and focusing more on designing spaces at the edge of formal spaces, disciplines, and processes, given they are less encumbered by the inertia of the bordering spaces and can lead to potential discovery and innovation. Then thinking about process of design, and as has been successfully been the case at Imperial, thinking about how student and staff users can be involved directly in the development of these edge ecotone or transitional spaces, and how they can be supported to occupy a sort of design ecotone in which ownership of the space is increased and the users perceive themselves as design partners. And finally, is thinking carefully about evaluation and the methods we use to understand the impact of space on belonging and learning, which from our research concludes that a mixed method can be most powerful in studying the lived experience at different levels and from different perspectives. Once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to present and for this amazing event, which I'm looking forward to the rest of, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Luke, for the presentation, and really looking forward to look more deeper into the project and understand more about the mixed methodologies, which sounds really interesting. And I think that you're doing the right tools for collecting this data. So well done on that. Thank you very much. If there's any questions for Luke, we can have this in the Q&A session, or please use the chat box to include any questions at the moment. So that's absolutely fine. We'll now move to our second talk in this panel for Marie Berthet Milan. Marie, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello,
Excellent.
hello.
Okay, hi Marie. If you would like to share your screen.
Yes.
Marie is a researcher within the field of urban geography with specific interest in bottom-up, grassroots, and citizen-centered urban development. She has expertise in urban nightlife studies and nightlife arts-led activism. Marie is the research fellow for the Intercultural and Sense of Belonging in Green Spaces project at the University of Leeds. And the title of Marie's talk today is The Construction of Belonging in Green Spaces. Welcome, Marie, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jihan. Thank you for this amazing opportunity and this amazing event once more. And thank you, Karen. So as Jihan said, I'm going to talk about the construction of belonging in green spaces. So it's not exactly architecture, although, you know, we expand the definition of architecture to public space, I suppose. So the data that I'm going to present today are the results from a project called Integrating Cultural Cities Through Belonging in Green Spaces. So as Jihan said, I work as research fellow with her and for her as part of this project. It is, as the title suggests, a project that has been running for the last 7 months, through which we investigated the way that green spaces users develop and build a sense of belonging, particularly and specifically in an intercultural environment. And you know, in connection with the other talks that have taken place previously, as I will explain, there is a strong sort of emphasis on the way interculturality can involve the presence of students and diverse communities in a sort of expanded way. Why won't it let me? Yeah, here we go. Just to give you a little bit of the context of the project. So this is the project team. There's Jihan is the principal investigator. There's 2 co-investigators and 2 research fellows, including myself. And I'm showing these slides just to show how interdisciplinary the team is, because we have expertise in architecture, psychology, law, and geography. So the context of the project, this is a map of Leeds, for those who don't know Leeds. Here you can see the University of Leeds. And so the area in which we research is called Hyde Park. It is a very famous, notorious area among students. It is historically in Leeds, the Asian neighborhood. It's got 3 of the 4 mosques, I believe, that we have in Leeds. And over the 90s and early 2000s, there's been an influx of student population. So now it's a highly intercultural neighborhood in all possible sense of the term, because there is a diverse population of local residents, but also because of this mix of students and local residents. So this is the Hyde Park area. This is the University of Leeds campus. And so we chose Hyde Park as the case study for this study. And particularly, we looked at 2 green spaces in Hyde Park, one of which is Woodhouse Moor, which is this very large piece of land. Maybe I should have started by saying that Hyde Park has one of the lowest provision of green spaces in Leeds, but also in the whole of England. So it's an incredibly dense area, which means that green spaces in Hyde Park are under a lot of pressure. So that was our first case study, was Woodhouse Moor, for the reason that it is basically sandwiched between Hyde Park, the area of Hyde Park, but also the campus. So Woodhouse Moor is quite heavily used by local residents, but also by students, and very much marked by the events in academic year, graduations, and so on and so forth. Our second case study is the Royal Park site, which is a community garden that has emerged as part of the project. So just to talk briefly about the modes of inquiries, the way that we gathered the data. Maybe I should have started to say that it's a project that ran over an incredibly short amount of time. So we started in January, and we are about to conclude, at least for the first phase of the project. So it ran over 7 months. So I think it's quite remarkable the amount of data that we've been able to gather over that amount of time. So the first mode of inquiry was workshops. So we held 3 workshops in and out of the university. These workshops included members of the general public, policymakers, sustainable and community gardening experts, community groups, and community garden partners. So as I said, the Royal Park site, which is on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see an aerial photo of the Royal Park site, and you can see a volunteer working in the Royal Park site on the top right-hand side. So Leeds City Council and Hyde Park Source, which is a grassroots organization in Leeds that organizes community gardens and manages community gardens, were our 2 partners, and they were also included in the workshops. And obviously academic colleagues from urban cultural studies, sociology, psychology, and law. We held community mapping sessions. For this, we hired a venue which was in the heart of the community. It's a venue called All Hallow Church, and it works as a food bank, but also as a community cafe. And so in the middle of the slide, you can see a capture of one of the 3 community mapping sessions. It was they were held as a drop-in basis. So it was predominantly food bank users and cafe users that came and sort of engaged with the maps and delivered us with their stories about green spaces. And last but not least, we partnered with Leeds City Council and Hyde Park Source to co-design an intercultural garden. So this garden was led by Hyde Park Source in collaboration with 15 volunteers, which was a mix of local residents and students. And amongst the students, we had a fairly sort of 50-50 share of UK-based students and international students. So again, it was a very diverse group of volunteers. Those volunteers were interviewed at the start of the project. And again, recently, and obviously the idea was to see if their participation to the project had impacted their sense of belonging, and if so, how. So what we did was do a bit of thematic analysis, basically crossing over the data that we had gathered during the workshops, in the maps, in the community mapping sessions, and in the transcripts, in the interviews with garden volunteers. We created what we called a sort of matrix of belonging in green spaces. We tried to visually represent how people do construct their sense of belonging in green spaces. And we came up with 3 main themes. The first one is sensual experience, which I will develop right now. So we went from embodied experience to sensorial experience, and finally kept that idea of sensual experience for the reason that the first and most important aspect of the stories of belonging in green spaces that we received was that belonging is very much embedded in joy, in pleasure. So it's not only an embodied experience or an experience of the senses, but it is also an experience of pleasure of being in space. The second aspect was exposure to others, and that was also an incredibly important aspect of participants' construction of belonging in green spaces. Obviously, we had results that were very different depending on what mode of inquiry we used, and participants who were involved in the community garden projects put a lot more emphasis on socializing and the presence of others and the sort of mutual learning that came out of this experience. However, participants who talked about using green spaces such as publicly managed open public green spaces also talked about the presence of others, and interestingly enough, the presence of others sort of spanned from accepting the presence of others, intentionally seeking solitude, whilst accepting that, you know, their experience in green spaces would involve coming across other people to actively being socializing in green spaces. Last but not least, and I think that's something that very strongly resonates with the two presentations that we've just enjoyed. Agency space is an element that came up very strongly in our participants' accounts, and this across the board. So participants talked about what you can do in green spaces and how those practices of being in green spaces do influence their sense of belonging. So just to go a bit more in depth in this data, the sensual experience of belonging, and that's perhaps something that relates the most strongly to the notion of architecture. A lot of our participants talked about the texture of green spaces. So green spaces were described as spaces of pleasure, spaces of enjoyment, spaces of pleasurable smells and touch and views. One thing that really stayed with me through these interviews was how a lot of people talked about, you know, how some forms of embodiment, and I think about like lying on the floor, sitting on the floor, sitting in being groups, are permitted in socially accepted in green spaces, but they wouldn't be accepted anywhere else in the urban environment. So green spaces really were described as a sort of break in the repetitive texture of the urban environment. They were also described as a space where people were exposed to non-humans. So they talk about animals, they talk about plants, they talk about insects, which is again something that is quite unique in terms of people's experience of a mainly built urban environment. They were described as spaces of mindfulness. So perhaps whilst a shopping mall or a shopping center or a street are spaces that are seen as purely functional, green spaces are spaces where people can rest and be more mindful and also be playful and active. So more connected to their emotions and more connected to their bodies. So as I said, the second aspect was exposure to others. And there was obviously a strong element of acceptance of others, or acceptance of the potential encounter with others. But there was, as we delved into the data that emerged from the community garden, we also sort of started highlighting elements of socialization, practices of socialization in green spaces, which were more actively seeking exposure to others, but also more actively an expression of like the acceptance of difference. And that was something that was incredibly important as well. And something that very much resonated with Luke's with Luke's presentation, particularly when it came to the community garden, was how green spaces were incredibly fertile environment where people felt like they could learn from each other. There was a strong narrative around how other urban spaces, perhaps social interactions are very much regulated by stronger hierarchies or stronger roles, whereas in green spaces there was a much more sort of horizontal negotiation of social relationships, and people could learn from one another and communicate in a much more sort of mutual way. And last but not least, agency in space. So agency in space was a theme that emerged at different scales. So from the most sort of miniature scale, being able to grow and pick and touch, which again is quite a unique feature of green spaces. If you think of your own experience of walking down the street of a city, is very rarely that you are able to touch things, engage with the texture of things in a pleasurable way, collect something, enjoy the smell of something. And then as the interviews developed, regardless of whether the interviews were conducted in relation to public spaces or the community garden, there was a strong element of people being heard, being able to make choices, which they thought was a unique feature of green spaces, but also reclaiming space. And that's also perhaps in future research, an aspect of the research where we could engage more in clashes of use of green spaces and contested uses of green spaces, but also reclaiming responsibility of a space. And that is something that very strongly emerged from the community garden. So just to introduce a little bit of discussion, because as I said, we are in the very early stages of this research, and we're sort of like coming to an end with the analytical phase of the research. The first element, perhaps, which isn't on the slide, but that sort of occurred to me as I was putting the presentation together yesterday. The first element is how our matrix, which brings together the sensual experiences, the exposure to others, and the agency in space, very much sort of reflects the lit review that we did in preparation for the project, where when we started theorizing belonging and trying to think about how we were going to engage with belonging in green spaces, we came out with this lit review that mapped belonging as a practice or a feeling, which is across three elements. The first is belonging is a feeling which is very individual, very personal. The second is that belonging is something that cannot exist without the presence of others, because feeling like you belong is also being accepted by a group, by a social group and by a community. And the last one is that belonging is a feeling that connects to a particular space. And so I think it's interesting that our thematic analysis sort of connected very well with the lit review. The second aspect is that green spaces have architectural features that I believe make them absolutely unique in urban spaces. And this is why they are so precious and were so valued by our participants. They are practices, they are social practices, they are embodied practices which we cannot reenact anywhere else in the urban space. And the third element, which as part of this discussion that I would like to point out, is how the physicality of green spaces very strongly contrasts with an urban environment, which is heavily driven by corporate actors. So one of the part of this project, an important part of this project, was collaborating with Leeds City Council and discussing how belonging has the potential to inform policies. And the result of this conversation was really that belonging is a very useful concept when it comes to modeling spaces which respond to the need of a community. And so in an era, in a time and space where most green spaces in the UK are now the fact of property developments, it was really useful for them to think about how they could escalate belonging to perhaps model other forms of an urban environments. Well, thank you very much for your attention and for the opportunity to present. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to connecting these different presentations, because I think they are genuinely like themes that sort of cut across the board of the different presentations. So thank you very much, Jihan and Karen.
Thank you very much, Marie. So we're going to move to our third speaker now, Alejandra Hernandez. She's an interior architect with a postgraduate degree in ephemeral space from the Polytechnic University of Catalonia in collaboration with Arquin, with studies in museography and the Faculty of Architecture in UNM. She has an extensive experience in the Art Guild and has collaborated in major museum institutions. She designs and creates spaces for living experiences. She's also enthusiastic about admiring rather than simply looking. She tells stories, dreams, and invites to dream. She loves to capture moments and share experiences by drawing and with a camera. That is so exciting, Alejandra. Thank you very much. A very different bio to be introducing today. It's not research heavy, but it's more about enthusiasm and aspiration. So thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Ale Hernandez. Can you tell me that? It is a word mentioned that I'm just starting in this research, and I'm very happy to share my findings. And of course, I'm interested in continuing learning. Image, but the visual and mental allows you to capture and remember places. Giving down personal emotions meaning and allows us to feel more connected to them. However, technical advances, particularly mobile devices, smartphones, have transformed the way the approach to and experience the space. And this is a photograph. Mine. This is to example the sorry. Okay. The energy. This is in Mexico received approximately more than 126 million people. There are already average 104 million smartphones in hands to Mexicans. Number is growing daily at large scale. This is through the ethnographic study and direct observation, we intend to terminate of use technology and act to create image of the space, cognitive memories and emotions that make you feel sense and worship of the place. This is exposure to Mexico City, 2022 perceptions, and Antonio Arola. Antonio Arola makes an exhaustive research and transform the office space by life. The intention of the installation is to suggest the spectator becomes the main actor and immersed in a place where a movement and reflections changes the perception and create magical, dreamlike, unreal environment. It's a vast and all solutions which helps to connect with human beings with technological and digital norms. And look this video, please, with me. And these videos, it is a dance between words when generating images that are programmed and modified to perfectly size, color, and shape. Can you hear?
Is that okay?
Yes, you hear the music? And this is a music questionnaire. This is other kinds of music with the same people in the same space. And there are a few questions that I would like answered with this research in the future. Can this act promote agreed engagement with the space, or can it fail to have to detailed attention, deeper exploration, and a real significance of the space? What is the real relationship between the digital image and our perception on the space we visit, identify with? And this is all. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ale. I know you were nervous, but you did great. I know this is a life-changing experience, but thank you so much. Professor Salim is back. Jihan, you want to introduce our next speaker?
Yes, our next speaker, Abril Cabrera, an architect by the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and has more than 6 years of experience in corporate and residential interior design. In addition to collaborating in the design area, she has extensive experience in construction management. She also enjoys outdoor activities and ecology themes, nature lovers, as well as watercolor painting. The floor is yours, Abril.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Do you have any slides to share?
Yes, sure. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know how to do this. Yeah, I think. No. Okay, can I share like this? Is it okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you, Karen, for the opportunity and the space. I'm a little bit nervous as well. I want to tell you that I'm more like a pragmatic person. I took this theme as a life inspiration. I'm not that academic, and I'm more like I don't know. It's more that I'm a pragmatic person, and I took this theme from my experience. I like to travel a lot. I travel since very small, very young age, because I have a family in South America and in Europe and in the States. So this is part of what I'm like inspired for. So the theme is, has globalization had an influence on the sense of belonging given to colors in different regions of the world? what's globalization? Globalization is an exchange of resources and idea, but it can be seen from two perspectives, very different. The idea that being connected at us, it gives us another perspective. It breaks down barriers and makes us feel closer. As you can see, we now have internet. We can connect now, right? In the States, you're in London, LA is in Mexico, so it's amazing. We're connected. But in the other hand, the idea that globalization can act as a threat because we act like masses. We leave aside the critical part, and everything seems to be disposable. But what's happening on the subject of the color trends? And that's where I came with the inspiration. Whenever I go out and whenever I travel, I have the opportunity to, for example, for living in New Orleans. And at the first time you go out and you can see all these colorful houses, this I don't know, it's just the first glance. And whenever I go through the days, I realize that it's just, this is full of kind of, it gets to the culture because it's very colorful. People are super happy and there's a lot of music. So what is happening on the subject of color trends? Has globalization made countries that have new colors, values, and concepts giving as new meaning to something that did not exist, or that in absence of globalization did not have that meaning? Can globalization influence the sense of belonging that is given to a certain color in different regions around the world? And the other question is, can we relate to other cultures through a new perspective or a new semiotic of color thanks to globalization? So I was telling you that we want to prove, or I want to prove or disapprove through historical color studies and current evaluation surveys about color perception and ownership, and whether color trends are the same in different regions of the world, specifically those that have been more reluctant to entry of globalization, and how much globalization can make us identify with elements and colors that we're not really everyday for us, but somehow feel close to. So in this research, we'll have to consider different variables, such as different cultures within the same continent, different cultures in different continents, and similar cultures in different continents. These variables will have to be considered from before the beginning of globalization until these days. And finally, the purpose of this research is to know the impact that globalization has had on our semiotic of color, on the sense of belonging that is given to us, the sense of expression and identification with others, and if in all regions of the planet it has permeated equally, or the few barriers that we have been placed to it. As they say, the sense of belonging is a perspective, is a personal perspective, but it's something that we connect with others. Yeah, so in this image, we can see these beautiful patterns, embroidered Mexican, they're Mexican textiles that are embroidered by these women, and this is full of colors, and somehow these are nowadays they took this like a concept and put it in clothes, and they sell them worldwide, right? I was also in the other, I had another presentation, but you can also see like a lot of colors, and we have in Mexico this color that is called bougainvillea color, or Mexican pink, as we called it. And this color was created in the 40s because of a designer. A designer was doing an exposition with clothing, a fashion designer. and he got the inspiration on a flower, a pink flower. So now we have this color in Mexico that it's like super, it identifies us somehow. As I was telling you, in New Orleans, they also have like this amazing, colorful city. It's full of joy, and it relates. The colors also relate to Mardi Gras. That is like a big carnival. It's a parade, and you can take like the picture when the crews go and do the parade with all these Native American costumes. And I think it also comes with the jazz music that it's all around in the city. They're all the time partying. It's all alive. It's very colorful. And this is also an image of a celebration in India that it's called Happy Holi, I think, or Holi. As I researched a little bit, it's a celebration of good over evil, and this party or this celebration, they also took it all around the world to do festivals, concerts, and running races with this concept. So in this image, we can see how Coca-Cola advertising played a big role in shaping like Red Christmas. The first image portrayed, it was like as a Santa Claus, a red Santa Claus. It appeared in the 30s, and yeah, well, we now can identify Christmas with red, with Coca-Cola, and I think that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Abril, for the presentation. I have some questions for you, but we will go with order first. But really exciting and interesting to see the association between how colors are making, in the era of globalization, are making the impact on belonging. And so I'll come to my question later on, but I think there are some questions in the chat box. I think, Luke, you started answering in writing, correct?
Yes, I did. I hope that was sufficient use of time.
Would you like to reflect in a minute or two on your answer to Karen's question?
Yes.
Which was, it's Karen, you mentioned restored appreciation for in-person connection after a year of disconnection. Do you think these connections have been really restored? Do you think educational spaces have an expiration date?
Yeah, again, two really good questions. Thank you, Karen. The first one, it seems from our projects that when you give students choice in their learning, there can be a very sort of varied spectrum of how students engage with those choices. So with hybrid learning, we're finding that some students will really embrace coming to campus and being in physical learning spaces. Others we find are still being very withdrawn and choosing to engage remotely out of either convenience, but also factors like personal finance and other factors that shape how they engage with that choice. So we've got a really interesting study and an ongoing reflection around that. And to the second question, which is a really interesting one and obviously concerns all of us as architects, is do learning spaces have an expiry date? It's really the trade-off between human agency in terms of the wanting to enact an intended activity. So for example, using a regular lecture theatre for really interactive or discovery-based learning versus changing that space to make that activity and agency easier to enact. So I personally believe that if an institution has the resource to adjust its learning spaces, it should do so, and it should try to do it in a way that really engages users, as I said in my presentation. So I think to an extent it does have an expiry date, but we don't always have the luxury of being able to redesign spaces. So I hope that answers.
Thank you so much, Luke.
Yeah. Another question from Danu to you again, Luke. Danu's interested in your methodology on walking interviews. So can you share more about this methodology and the process and how effective it is?
Yes, I think rather than talking anymore, I'll very happily direct Daniel to some resources and links in the chat, if that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, that's excellent.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Maybe a question to Avril, maybe it's a reflection more of a question, because I'm really interested in that notion of globalization and how the color is starting to have that embedded effect on national understanding and its meaning and its interpretation in the everyday activity and life, and how do we see that? But the question is, or the thing here is that, is this having impact on belonging, or is it a matter of identity and pride of identity? And if it's about identity, how do we make those synergies between belonging and identity? How do you make a differentiation between both of them?
That's a good question. I think what made me like very curious through the process, it was, as I told you, like my traveling experiences. And I think the best example, I mean, not in every color, you know, but the best example is the one at the end of Coca-Cola, you know, that you relate the color with Christmas. Like Christmas is red now. And I think it depends. It depends how you work with it, and if you have like marketing or I don't know. It's just it depends. It depends. Yeah, it goes through the culture, and sometimes it goes through much more than that, like color paintings in the walls, and it's different. I don't know. I think it might be. It depends.
Yeah. And I think there's a very strong association as well with memory, specifically if you're living abroad or outside of your home country, is that when you see a specific color, it brings the memory of things, and then it infuses the identity, and then the identity will create a kind of belonging that, is this my place or not? It's my comfort zone, it's my personal space or not. So I think there is a kind of correlation and integration between all of them, but really interesting to understand how color is associated and brings all these kind of thematic ideas and conceptualization all together. Thanks a lot. I think we have a raised hand from Laura to ask a question. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself and ask the question, please?
Hi, everyone. Hola a todos. Really nice to be part of this. Thanks, everyone, for the presentations. I'm in the School of Geography at the University of Leeds, and this is probably maybe why I'm a bit more like, I wanted to ask my question to Maria Avril, if she's up for it.
Yes,
I wondered,
sure.
hi, I wondered if you could talk a bit more about, because you talked about the fast pace of the project, so of kind of the early stages of how you guys went about, you know, just contacting communities and getting them involved, because that requires quite a lot of trust building, I guess. So I wondered if you can talk about that. And then that brings me to the second question around community building within like the project, I guess. Because you kind of, you know, talked about the different communities that merge in Hyde Park. So how was the project received, and kind of what would be kind of the next stage of the project? I'm not sure how long the project is. I might have missed that. I didn't hear that, but yeah, kind of, and what are, you know, yeah, the next stages in involving the community. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm sure Jihan will have elements to add, not the least because she obviously has a bigger picture than I do. So the first question was in regards the lifespan of the project. I think one thing which is important to say is that so it's a research that was funded by the policy, by Research England, but there is a policy engagement funding pot. So it is very policy orientated. And the way that we framed the project was really around policy engagement. So it's a first you know, we're at the very first stage of starting to understand how green spaces are constructed, what kind of, you know, pressures, tensions there are around those particular kind of spaces. And our focus was around the way individual members of the community, but also collective groups within the community sort of build a sense of belonging in relation to specifically those green spaces. So, you know, we're at a policy engagement stage, which means that we will not emerge from this first stage of the project saying this is how policies should be transformed to enhance local residents' sense of belonging in green spaces. So, and that connects to the second part of your question, which is that the project has been a collaboration with 2 other organizations. The first one is Leeds City Council. And, you know, with the benefits and the difficulties, to put it very politely, of collaborating with a public body. But one of them being that obviously they are a strong presence. They are a strong institution and they are a strong presence. And they are the ones who, on a daily basis, run, manage, fund green spaces, public green spaces. And they also made that plot of land available, the Royal Park site, for those who know Leeds and know Hyde Park. So I showed it briefly on the map. It is a plot of land that was at the center, which is literally at the center of Hyde Park, which also has like a really strong history that is very embedded in the community, and it was a very heavily contested space. So, you know, it's also interesting to capture that moment when the council, in collaboration with local residents, is transforming it into a green space. And the third partner in the project is Hyde Park Source, which is a grassroots organization in Leeds. So I think, you know, collaborating with the council and collaborating with Hyde Park Source is definitely what has given us an facilitated access to the community, and also gives that sense of permanence of the project, because this park is, so basically this park is about to open and it's going to be like a public park, a public green space. Then for what was the sort of like direct first-hand data that we gathered in terms of community engagement, as I said, we partnered again with Rainbow Junction, which is it is a food bank. And because of ethical issues, and also because, as I said, it was a way of engaging with people's stories of green spaces, we ran the sessions on a drop-in basis. So it was advertised by them. They were saying, you know, there's a group of researchers who are doing this piece of research, and they'd like to hear your feelings, your stories, your impressions of green spaces across Leeds. And I basically had like 2 A0 size maps of Leeds, of Hyde Park and Leeds, and then maps at different scales if they had other stories that they want to. And it was just like, it was really interesting because I was a bit concerned. I wasn't sure, you know, how much they would want to participate. I received a really warm welcome. It was actually really fun to do it. And people were genuinely, you know, really chatty and really interested. And yeah, very thankful for the opportunity to talk about that. And as I went back, so I went every Thursday over 3 weeks, I bumped into the same people. But, you know, then obviously you also have to be honest and don't give any, it's all about expectation management, isn't it? So, and explain as well, you know, be very clear that you're trying to understand how people construct their sense of belonging in green spaces. and you know that it's the first stage of a research, so it's not like action research. It's not going to have a direct impact straight away. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I don't know, Jihan, if you want to add anything.
No, Marie, I think you said it all. Thank you very much. Laura, also just to highlight two things. So the project is 9 months, not 7. We just started to kick off with actual action 7 months when Marie joined us, but it's a 9 months. And the funding is meant to be for building collaborations and partnerships. So part of what we're trying to do is to build that trust that you're talking about, is to create the network through the activities. And that's why we try to use different methods and events to create the platform for this network. You definitely know that it's very, very difficult to access Leeds City Council members. But I think we have made some good progress on success on that, and Marie has done a great job in allowing us some of that access and getting them on board and joining some of the events and actually co-designing one of the events that we have run already. So it is a matter of we are experimenting and piloting and trying to build a network, trying to build the channels of trust, trying to identify the right partnerships that will help to develop the work further, if that answers your question again. Right. Right. Do we have any other questions in the chat box?
We don't, Jihan.
Oh, right. Okay, I think that was answering the questions from Luke. Thank you very much, Luke. Right. So I think we are just on time for a break. Everybody deserves a break and go and catch a cup of coffee. But please, let's see you back again at 12:05 for the second panel, hopefully. So there's a kind of 15-minute break until 12:05. Thank you very much for all the speakers in the first panel. Really delighted and really interesting discussions and presentations. And I think the whole purpose of the knowledge exchange and transfer has been achieved and accomplished. And I already know that some of our group already are going to have some more conversations with some of you after the seminar. So thank you very much for every speaker in the first panel, and looking forward to the second one in due course. See you in 15 minutes.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is back so we can start on time. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I'm going to start the introduction of Dr. Debra Cureton. So Dr. Debra Cureton is the Associate Professor of Equity in Learning and Teaching, and it is based in the Doctoral College at the University of Wolverhampton. Through this role, she supports the ongoing development of the university's doctoral college. Her role focuses on individual development and equality of experience for both university staff and students. This involves supporting the development of researchers at all stages of their careers through the provision of development programs that relate to VTA's research development framework, mentoring, and other developmental opportunities. In the past, Debra led the university staff mentoring scheme. Debra, welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much for inviting me. I was just saying it's been an absolutely fascinating seminar so far. So my name's Debra Cureton and I work at the University of Wolverhampton. And today I'm going to talk about the other side of my job, which is being an Associate Professor of Equity in Learning and Teaching. So I work in the Doctoral College, but I also support the university in the rolling out of our access and participation plan. And in particular, I've led on work relating to belonging. Now, before I start, there are two things that I just need to clarify. I'm currently wearing corrective lenses, so I'm not wearing sunglasses and I'm not trying to be too cool for school, but I do have dyslexia, and the corrective lenses allow me to be able to read my slides. And the other aspect is there may be something on my slides that you can't read, and I do apologise if that actually happens. So in the presentation today, what I'm going to cover is, for me, what is belonging. I'm going to give you an introduction to my background in belonging. And I'm a psychologist. I apply my psychological insights into the practice of education in higher education. I started out researching into the outcome gap, which Louise was talking about in the first presentation this morning. And through that investigation of the outcome gap, it became apparent that belongingness, the sense of belonging, was very, very important to undergraduate student retention, progression and success. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the psychological elements and the psychosocial elements and why they're important to me. I'm going to share a little bit of the research that we've done in the past around belonging in higher education and what that told us and what we've done as a result of that, and share some of our how we've applied some of our findings into place and physical and into the physicality of the university. And I'm going to note here, it certainly won't be as sophisticated as the wonderful work that Luke is doing at Imperial. So those of you who have been working in the field of belonging will know that there is some issues around what is the definition of belonging, but as Marie Avril pointed out, there are some commonalities, and so I've used the Cambridge definition because it does draw on those commonalities. And for the purpose of this presentation, we're looking at a feeling of being happy or comfortable. Sorry, I can't, I'm going to have to move people around because I can't see my slides. A feeling of being happy or comfortable as part of a particular group, or having a good relationship with other members of a group because they welcome you and they accept you. Now, I'm going to tell you why that's important to me, and why I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about me as a person. This is me many years ago, as you can probably tell by the photograph, graduating with an undergraduate degree in psychology from the university that I currently work at. And you can see in the background that my university has stamped me as a human, so they're verifying that I am a human being. And the reason I want to tell you this story is it's going to help locate me and help you locate me ontologically and help you understand why I argue some of the arguments I do in terms of what belonging is. So I grew up in the early 70s in Telford, before it was known as Telford. In those days, it was a group of probably about 6 little villages that had their own discrete and distinct identity, their own dialects, and their own accents. So when I came to university, when I joined university in 1992, I was coming to university from an area where there was a low socioeconomic background, multiple deprivations, a low higher education aspiration, and I think the average qualification for the area that I grew up in is still something like 2 GCSEs. So people like me didn't go to university. So on my first day of university, I was sat in the University of Wolverhampton because I felt that was a good university for me, because hopefully it would accept people like me, but feeling a little bit lost and lonely and a little bit nervous, until I heard somebody shout across the coffee bar that I was in, "Au bish jockey," in a broad Dawley accent. Now, for those of you who don't understand Dawley, that was a greeting. That was a common greeting in Dawley for somebody to say hello to somebody else from Dawley. The response was Boston How's thee, which is, I'm great, thank you, how are you? And as soon as I heard those words in that accent, I relaxed. And I knew that this was a place for me because there was other people like me in this space. Now here I'm going to highlight that my definition of acceptance was all about there being people like me, people who were specifically from my background and from my area of the country. I wasn't defining myself as a woman. I wasn't defining myself as a working class woman. I wasn't defining myself as a mature student. At that point, I was 22 years old. So I fell into the category of mature students. I wasn't defining myself as a student who'd completed A-levels or a student who'd also completed an access course, an access to higher education. And also my definition was laden with privilege. So I identify as white. I've never had to worry that I wouldn't fit into a place or space because of the colour of my skin or because of my religious beliefs. So I've told you this because I wanted to highlight that that belonging has a strong psychological element as well as a psychosocial element. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what I mean about the psychological elements. So obviously the psychological elements are all about the internal processes, the things that go on inside us, and it's about our need for connection, and drawing specifically on the definition that I shared earlier, the feelings of being part of something, feeling happy, feeling accepted and feeling welcome. And as Louise noted earlier, it links very strongly to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's squished there in the middle, either side of esteem and safety. And so it links into esteem, and it links into that through that connection with others, that we're approved of, we have that feeling of being approved of, and that we will receive positive regard through those people around us. Then it also links to family and feelings of safety and access to resources. And I'm going to return, hopefully, if I have time, to this concept of family and how that also links to belonging. So going back to the definition, you can see where, you know, there can be some individual differences in the way that we define some of these elements. So we've got, you know, being happy. Not everybody defines being happy in the same way, or comfortable, or being part of a group, or good relations, good relationships. Not everybody feels being welcomed in the same way, or expects to be welcomed in the same way, or defines being accepted in the same way. So this is where it's important to look at the psychosocial, because that is the flip side of the coin. So it's not about us, and it's all about them. It's our other people relating with us and us being part of. So it's multifaceted with many layers that includes social, cultural, professional, community or society, and of course the spatial, the environment in which we're in. It also includes being a part of, and it's about them, whoever they are, including and accepting you and I, and including us as including us to be part of the us rather than the them. And this is governed by group rules, group think, intergroup politics, intergroup practices, some of which may not be inclusive. So therefore it may include some people with certain characteristics, but not include others with other characteristics. So again, when we look at the flip side of the coin, we can see where the groups may have a specific definition of being part of, who their group is, how they term good relationships, who the members of that group are, and their practices around welcoming and accepting people. So you can immediately see where there might be some clashes between the psychological, the individual, and the group. So we also, in the research that I've engaged in, come across a few more problems with the term belonging. Belonging is attributed to the individual, so it's about an individual fitting into a bigger space, place, or group. And therefore, it's a high-level definition that is often used to fit with a one size that fits all. Those of you who have done research in this area know that there's very little consensus about how we define it, and definitions currently don't articulate belonging in an inclusive way. And it often has a deficit model. So it kind of looks at belonging and insinuates that if you don't belong, it's something to do with you and you need fixing in order to feel that you do belong, rather than actually the group or the environment isn't as inclusive as it can be or welcoming. In the literature, there's a lack of how to generate a sense of belonging and to include people, and research in the past has often taken place and hasn't taken place and space into account. And when we were doing our research at the University of Wolverhampton, this was something that we didn't take into account until it actually came out of our data and told us it was important. And obviously we have to take on board the individual, in that actually some people don't want to be part of the group. And I've included the famous Groucho Mark about I refused to join a club that would have me as a member. So the research that we did at the University of Wolverhampton drew on a number of key tenets, and these have we've included others over time. So first and foremost, that we were focusing on the sense of belonging as being one of the most important factors in student retention, success and success. We did note that poor mental health can be a barrier to belongingness, that a sense of belonging plays a significant part in the outcome differential at undergraduate level, and that there are differences in sense of belonging between our global majority students and their white counterparts. And to begin with, we didn't know whether this was about the way that belongingness was being defined, the way that belongingness was being measured, or actually the university itself, and that that there wasn't an inclusive opportunity for people to belong. So Wolverhampton, a little bit about the university itself. We are a post-92 university. We are a widening participation university with a big proportion of part-time and mature students. Most of our students are first in family to study. 90% of our students commute, and they often commute from a 25-mile radius of the university, and often come to university with people that they've studied with at other levels. So often they've come through infant, junior, secondary and college with a group of people that they then come to university with. They may not study the same subject, but they've still got that friendship group within the university space. Our student body is very diverse. 52% of our students are from a global majority background, and we have a range of ethnicities within our student makeup. And we have equity and retention and success. Start again, Deborah. Equity in retention and success of students is one of our key strategic goals. So we've been working in this area, we started off working in this area looking at the outcome gap, and belongingness became an important feature of that. And we started to focus on belongingness more specifically as we went through the process. But we've been working in this area for about 15 years now, and we continue to work in this area. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the projects that we've done, what that told us, and then what we now know as a result of what we've done through some of the other projects that we are currently running. So first of all, some of the early research told us that there were that some individual psychology was very, very important in the process. So this is a concept map of how the various different elements of belonging were coming out of our research, were kind of linking with each other. So we knew that psychological contract is the unspoken expectations that the individual has of an organisation that they are joining, and it's taken from the world of occupational psychology, but really does apply in education as well. It's not just about employees, it's about students. So it's about the unwritten psychological expectations or beliefs that a student has about what's going to happen in their learning environment, what it's going to be like, what support they're going to receive, and how they're going to experience education. And when a psychological contract isn't met, it can cause a violation of that psychological contract, which actually generates a psychological wound, and which means that students can actually disengage with the university process, and this is why it links into continuation. So we realised it became very important for us to understand our students' expectations of higher education. First of all, to see whether or not there was a mismatch in students' expectations or students coming into the university's expectations of learning in higher education and what we were going to provide for them. Secondly, to see whether these expectations were realistic, whether these expectations could be met, and importantly, whether there were any differences in these expectations. And what we found was that white students very much had an external locus of control around their expectations, in that they were expecting the university to provide everything that they needed, and they were going to be given and fed that information. Whereas our global majority students very much had an internal locus of control within their expectations, and it was about them, what they were going to do and what that was going to generate for them. But it became apparent that there was some misunderstandings around the rules of engagement with higher education, academic engagement, how to study in HE. And all of those linked into this concept of belonging. So if you had a psychological contract and the expectations weren't met and there's a psychological contract violation, belonging, you weren't going to feel that you belonged in the organisation, and that was going to negatively impact on continuation and retention. It was going to negatively impact on success. But we also noted that there was lots of feedback around place and space, and what the classroom would look like, what the technologies that were going to be in place, what the learning experience was going to be like. And often students didn't understand that perhaps a lecture theatre for 400 students wasn't necessarily going to be as technically as equipped as perhaps the classroom in their college had been. We started to see lots of differences in how belonging was being expressed by our students and by different student groups. Firstly, this arose originally within our Disparities in Student Attainment programme. This was a piece of work that was funded by the then Higher Education Academy, and it was a dual piece of work between the University of Wolverhampton and the University of Coventry, and it was co-led at Wolverhampton by Professor Glynis Cousin and myself, and at Birmingham by Professor Gurnham Singh, and very, very ably supported by Ariola Adalfila. And what this piece of work highlighted, that when we synthesized all of the data that we collected, and we did lots and lots of different pieces of work, and we synthesized it into 4 main areas where there was differences in understanding between white students and global majority students, or differences of experience. And belongingness played a part in all of these to a greater or lesser extent. So the first of these was relationships, and these were relationships with the learning relationships with tutors and lecturers, learning relationships with colleagues in the classroom, relationships with members of staff within the faculty or within the course, as well as relationships with the wider university. In terms of the psychosocial, the sense of belonging or not belonging was really key. We noted that there were some differences at this point between a sense of belonging for white students and a sense of belonging for our global majority students. And this fed into the cultural and social capital that students came into higher education with. And as I noted earlier, there were some differences in understanding of the rules of academic engagement, how to study in higher education, and who people had as role models, or who people could access to ask more about how to learn in higher education. And then finally, there was pedagogy, about feeling that you were represented in the curriculum that was being taught, and whether that curriculum was all about dead white men, basically. We took that understanding into the What Works phase 2. What Works phase 1 has highlighted that belonging was really important, and phase 2 was about taking that understanding and looking at ways of being able to generate belonging in the environment of higher education, removing the barriers to belonging, and also strategically aligning belonging within the university thinking. So we chose an assessment brief, an inclusive assessment brief project, because DISA had told us one of the major barriers to feeling like you belonged or you were going to be successful in higher education in both cases was about being able to do an assessment and being able to understand what the assessment brief was telling people to do. So I'm not going to go into any great detail about that, but if anybody's interested in that, I'm happy to tell you about that later or in an email. But as part of the programme, we were measuring belongingness using the Manshort belongingness survey. And we were measuring the growth and development of belongingness of a pilot group of students as they progressed through a 3-year degree. And what we noted was that there was differences between the experiences of our white students who were measuring a lot higher in the belongingness scales than our global majority students. And we didn't know whether this had anything to do with the makeup of the pilots group, or whether this was something that was more widespread across the university. So we did our first belongingness survey, where we tried to survey as many people across the university as possible. And this is now repeated every year. So I'll talk about the findings from our first belongingness study, and then I'll tell you how things have changed and why we think things have changed. So we have a student body of about 22,000, but we only managed to get 941 students to complete a questionnaire. But yes.
My apologies for interrupting you. We have 2 more minutes of your presentation, if that's okay.
That's brilliant, thank you. So we were very pleased that we got as many people as possible into the survey. So what the survey found was that there were some differences. So the survey itself has 3 subscales. One that looked at connectivity, which we've entitled belonging here, engagement in education, self-confidence, and then the full scale. So what we found was some differences to do with level of study. Level 4, level 6 students had higher sense of belonging than level 5 students. And we've put this down to the fact that students, we put a lot more effort into our first year and our third year students. When we looked at this, when we looked at age of study, age of students, we saw that the older the students were, the greater their sense of belonging. But when we looked at this against ethnicity, we saw that that played out for white students, but not for any of our global majority students. And I hate this title other, but that was on the questionnaire. And I think that this isn't a great title for a category for a belongingness study. And these trends actually align to the trends around student success. When we looked at ethnicity, we could see that our white students, again, had this higher sense of belonging than the rest of our global majority students. And when we looked at ethnicity via level of study, this dip for most of the student groups occurred again at level 5. The only difference was with our Black students. But we noted that those who didn't disclose their ethnicity and our Asian students were most at risk at level 4. So things are now very different. We now have a complete flip of that, and that our students from global majority backgrounds have a stronger sense of belonging than our white students. And we think that this is probably down to a number of initiatives that we put into place. So our Students' Union run a Belong, Believe, Achieve campaign. They've put into place a BIPOC rep, liberation rep, who supports and forwards the needs of our global majority students. We have an inclusivity framework that is rolled out across the university and asks faculties to look at belongingness from a faculty, a discipline level, a course level, and module level, and also to take a very diverse approach to an inclusive approach to belonging. We have an annual inclusivity conference where our best practice is demonstrated. We have inclusivity leads in the faculty that lead on the plans for the next year, which are all presented and agreed at the annual research conference and then at various faculty committees. And we have lots of individual initiatives that are going on around the university, and the most recent of this has been part of our That's Me project, which is the diversity hub. And the That's Me project is looking at barriers to higher education, doctoral education for global majority students. Click through to some of our findings around place and space. When we looked at belongingness dependent on campus, what we found was actually the smaller the campus and the less faculties that were involved in that campus, the stronger the sense of belonging. So sense of belonging was much stronger at our Telford campus that housed 1 faculty. The next was our Walsall campus that housed 2 faculties. So we took from that actually having a place and a space was really important, and having your own space was very important to student belonging. So each discipline area now has its own identity and its own space. Students also have places to meet and to spend time with each other. We put more plugs into the university spaces so that students can plug their computers in, so they're more likely to stay. Apparently that was a critical issue that we weren't addressing before. Students have access to kitchens, hot water and microwaves so that they can bring meals from home, they can microwave them, they can make themselves hot drinks. We have cafeterias and food outlets in every building. And we refurbished our courtyard to allow for a number of activities that valued and recognised the various different cultural experiences of our students, but also were inclusive as well. So we have things like the International Fair, we have open air cinemas, we have parties that kind of bring people together. Okay, so hopefully I've not run too much over time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Debra, and thank you for sharing your personal story. I think that was amazing to listen. And everyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box. And in the end of the panel, we will be sharing the Q&A. For now, I will be presenting our next speaker. Her name is Kansu Sonmes. Kansu, are you over there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Welcome. Yes. So I will introduce you, and if you want to start sharing your slides, please go on. So Kansu Sonmes, pronounced she, her, graduated top of her class in sociology in 2015 with a full scholarship from Izmir University of Economics. 1 year later, she successfully completed the double degree BSc Psychology at IUE. In 2016, she was awarded a Vice Chancellor Scholarship to study MSc in Criminology at the University of Plymouth in the UK. She graduated with distinction and was placed on the Dean's List by the University of Plymouth for the 2018 academic year due to her academic achievements. She is now in her final year of PhD studies in urban studies and regional studies at the Gran Sasso Science Institute in Italy. Her academic interests include critical urban and regional studies, decolonial geography, urban political ecology, qualitative and reflexive methodologies, mega infrastructure developments, marginalized and left behind communities, violence, displacement, grassroots resistance, and the geopolitical role of affect and emotion. Kansu, the floor is yours, and welcome.
Hi, Karen. Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you, everyone. So far, it's a very interesting seminar for me. I learned a lot of things, and now I approach this sense of belonging or belongingness in another angle. I'm going to present here one of the papers of my thesis, which is related to urban redevelopment practices in the resettlement of Hasan Cave after Ilusu Dam constructed, and also how the sense of belonging or community life has changed and shaped by these practices. So after being flooded, Hasan Cave town is integrated into Turkey's broader urban renewal agenda regarding resettlement. And the government implements strategies and practices in the resettlement similar to the general Turkish urban renewal agenda. And this integration has led to a sense of losing place, belonging, and downplaying the building of indigenous social infrastructures in the resettlement of Hasan Cave.
And to broaden the debates on social infrastructures at the end of the presentation, and in this paper, I outline 5 key features that highlight the need for and importance of indigenous social infrastructures in the context of urban redevelopment through resettlement. So I want to give a short background information for those who don't know the context. Ilusu Dam was implemented in 2020 and submerged 199 settlements and displaced 78,000 of people in the least developed region of Turkey, which is southeastern Turkey. The least developed in terms of social, political, educational, economic, infrastructural opportunities. And the region is known as also a Kurdish geography, and the armed conflicts with the Kurdistan Workers' Party still continue. So the geography is quite contested, exploited, and colonized through mega dam projects. And Hasankeyf is and used to be an ancient city and 12,000 years old ancient city, and carries various of cultures of Roma, Islam, Christianity, heritages, and is the only urban area considered as an only urban area, and the most controversial settlement among the dam-affected settlements in the region is because mainly due to the historical importance. And Hasankeyf, now the resettlement of Hasankeyf is 6 times bigger than the old one, the submerged one. And there is just 3 kilometers in between the 2 towns. And the government really attempted to build a new city there, as they were indicating this in their discourses as well. So it's quite big with the new social infrastructures and other opportunities. And from these pictures, you can understand the magnitude of the destruction of the archaeological elements, historical cave houses, and the ecology of Hasankeyf. And only 8 of these historical artifacts were transported into the resettlement town. And of course, my participants perceive this as an attack to cultural, natural heritage, social, special, ecological memories, history, livelihoods, and so on. And this is how the town looks like today, the resettlement town, which is way different and emerged from single-story houses. But the houses are big, I mean, compared to older ones, and more spacious. So in this paper, my aim is to understand the role of urban redevelopment practices and in shaping indigenous social infrastructures and community life, sense of belonging in the post-displacement and resettlement period. And I question how relations with social infrastructures are changed by urban redevelopment practices following the displacement and resettlement in Hasankeyf. So in terms of conceptual framework, I follow the 2 literature sources on the urban geography of social infrastructure and resettlement due to megadam projects. I rely on 4 definitions of social infrastructure that was made by Latham and Layton, and how these definitions could work in urban redevelopment and resettlement. So urban scholars who work in displacement and resettlement argue that there is a gap on how resettled people struggle to restore their sense of home, belonging, social relations. While much of the scholarship on place attachment examines the process of displacement, Wang, for instance, argues that previous studies do not address this issue in detail for the post-displacement and resettlement agenda. For example, people's adaptation, their interaction with the new environment or infrastructure, their sense of identity, sense of belonging to the new places, and their relationships. These are all neglected in the urban redevelopment and resettlement agenda. I followed qualitative case study methodology with the colonial methods, and like I conducted in-depth interviews with residents, key informal officials, or key officials, informants, and I analyzed related secondary resources. I also utilize a body mapping method. So when it comes to researching indigenous people's own infrastructural experiences and life practices, I propose to consider the geographical knowledge of indigenous Kurds and Arabs and their agencies instead of focusing exclusively on the Turkish nationalist approach, which led to assimilation of Kurdish culture in the region. And so I must say that maybe I didn't say it before, but the geography is quite, the Southeastern geography is composed of different ethnicities, Assyrians, Arabs, the Kurds, and so on. So these are the two body maps that 6 women made, and one is for the old town, the other one is for the resettlement. And they represent the individual, collective, emotional, and bodily responses. So basically, I asked my participants in the workshop questions to map different places on their bodies and social infrastructures on these maps and relate them to their lived experiences and emotions. And when it comes to my findings, displaced and resettled indigenous communities in Hasan Cave, namely Kurds and Arabs, have always interacted with existing social infrastructures that are compatible with the natural rural landscape of Hasan Cave and the lifestyle, such as, historical artifacts, cave houses, tandoori ovens, as you can see in the pictures, or traditional local shops, riverside cafes. These are the places that invite people to feel a place, a community, both materially, but also emotionally. For example, tandoori is an ethnic oven where women cook bread or other food inside. And in Old Hasan Cave, there were both public tandoori where women used to gather with relatives and neighbors, but there were also public tandoori in everyone's gardens. And tandoori was one of the important spaces for the communal interaction for women. And it promotes sociality, gathering with other people, eating, having a conversation, and feel belong to a place for these women. However, in the resettlement town, there are only few public tandoori, and the law doesn't allow people to construct their own tandoori in their gardens, so that some people build them informally, as you can see in the picture. And the practice of tandoori is based on indigenous knowledge, and people try to, maintain them, although the redevelopment plans don't allow to do so. But on the other side, some people feel also something has changed toward more an urban atmosphere in where these indigenous practices are not welcomed like Eileen felt, and internalize the new atmosphere. And she said, yes, we miss tandoori bread, but I don't like that smell anymore. That smell bothers me when it enters my house. But in the old Hasan Cave, it was a commonplace practice and smell for us. Every household had a tandoori, but now we are in a different place. And the second example, the second indigenous social infrastructure is for people, it was a cultural heritage. Like historical artifacts, archaeological places, ruins, and so on. And this picture was taken during the relocation of the tomb of Imam Abdullah, which caused people to mourn, especially women. And the tomb of Zeynel Bey had an important place for people. You can see in its old place, which is quite integrated into natural environment and mountains and so on. And in the new one, it's quite in an ordinary place. And people, I must say, were highly attached to and rooted with Zeynel Bey. For this reason, in its new place, some participants defined like as I feel I lost my childhood friends. Now there is no meaning when I visit the tomb. It's strange. He doesn't know where he belongs, and so on. And other, for instance, expressed this difficult encounter in association with the heart during the body mapping workshop. And she said, when I saw him on the top of the wheels, something broke out of my heart. And some participants, such as Arda, no longer visit historical artifacts, these relocated ones in the resettlement, because they associate emotional trauma with seeing them in their new place. And of course, when it changes, as Arda says, if you stood in the middle of the tomb, you could feel its unique wind system circulating in the space, which was believed to have a restorative properties. And this means also religious properties, like spiritual cleansing. And now it's a tragedy. I'm so sad to see him like this. So to conclude everything, so in this paper, the first thing first, why these indigenous social infrastructures matter. The first thing is the Klinenberg's definition of the roles and functions of the social infrastructures, as he defined in people as palaces. So spaces, I mean, these infrastructures have functioning to invite people into public space, to socialize together, to meet with each other in a public space, and they create a community life and sense of belonging. And secondly, these infrastructures, they're in the perpetual recreation and intergenerational reconstruction of indigenous knowledge and practices, as in tandoori oven, for instance. The knowledge of tandoori is transmitted to generation. And the third characteristic is that people build intimate connections and a sense of belonging, not only because they live in a place for a longer or visit the infrastructures frequently, but because the people construct rules based on them and feel rooted by them. So this is very important for these people. And fourthly, the attachment of effective experiences and values to these infrastructures, such as cultural heritage. They're highly, these people are highly attached to them effectively, emotionally. So there is a strong connection between them. And the final thing, final characteristic is the emergence of conflicts over local resources exacerbated by colonial systems that pose a threat to erosion of social infrastructures. So there is a threat coming from the Turkish state and government, always like invading the territory in the name of building, mega dams, mega infrastructures. And there is, and these places are colonized, and also the social infrastructures. And they keep changing them into, in the resettlement with the more modern facilities of infrastructures. And thank you very much for listening. And I'm happy to any questions and comments.
Kansu, thank you so much for your presentation. Indeed, everyone, if you have a question, please feel free to pop them in the chat box. I see that we are starting to have questions, so if we can wait for the Q&A, this would be amazing. So now we will continue with our next speaker, Dr. Pam Bertel. Are you there, Pam?
Hello, yes, I'm here, just managing all the various buttons and screens and things.
Hi, Pam. Is it okay if I introduce you?
Absolutely, go for it.
Cool. Well, first of all, Pam is my supervisor as well as Professor Jihan Salim. So it is really a nice surprise to have her in here. So Pam studied natural sciences at King's College, Cambridge, specialized in psychology in her final year, and developed an interest in brain mechanisms of reward. She studied for her PhD at the University of York under Simon Kilcross and Geoff Hall. She was appointed a lecturer in psychology at the University of Leeds in 2003 and was promoted in 2015 to associate professor. Welcome, Pam, and the floor is yours.
Lovely, right, I'll just see if I can share my screen properly. Okay, so this work is a project which I did a couple of years ago now with Chloe Thompson, who was a third-year student in psychology at the University of Leeds. And she was interested in looking at things related to sustainability. obviously in my work, I'm also interested in belonging. So we thought, let's bring these things together and see how sustainability and green campus spaces and student belonging might be important. So this is work that was collected by, this is all data that was collected by Chloe, and we've subsequently written it up, and there's a paper which has just recently been published in the International Journal of Sustainability in Higher Education, and there's a link to that on my last slide. So, why are we interested in doing this? So we're interested in belonging. Students spend a lot of time on campus, and campus spaces can be quite varied. So the University of Leeds campus is quite green in many spaces, but it's also quite brutalist. So there's large concrete 1960s buildings, which are softened by the green spaces around them. But we were interested in understanding how students respond to these green spaces and whether these green spaces are important for them in terms of their sense of belonging. This research was conducted sort of at the back end of the pandemic. So students were back onto campus and encountering campus for the first time after having lockdowns, after having been staying in their homes, after there being in kind of the conversations around university spaces and indeed other spaces about the importance of green spaces for well-being. So we're wanting to know whether the spaces that were green were important for students. We're also interested in understanding this difference between belonging and well-being. So belonging is something which can vary very much kind of moment to moment almost in terms of in different spaces. So as you move through space from one space to another, in some places you'll feel comfortable and feel like you belong, and in other spaces you may feel like an interloper. We're particularly interested in thinking about different sorts of students. So some students come to the University of Leeds from rural areas and some come from the city. And would these green spaces feel more comfortable, for example, for students from rural areas or students from higher socioeconomic status backgrounds than students who might be more used to more urban environments? So this was the question which we started asking, and we were very much inspired by the work of Arne, who has conducted quite a lot of work looking at the student sense of belonging, and we were using some of the methods that she reports in some of her papers. So these are the 4 spaces that we looked at in the university. We chose 2 spaces which were green, one space which is called a blue space, and one space which is much more urban. So the space here, which is in the sustainability garden, which is in the top left-hand corner, is a space which normally, I say normally, pre-COVID at least, was a space that was full of growing vegetables. So it was very much kind of about sustainable, it's called the sustainability garden, and it was about students participating in that space, growing vegetables, being able to take food from that space. The space at the bottom left is St George's Field, which is actually a disused cemetery. So you can't see it in this photograph here, but there are actually some tombstones. It looks quite Gothic, but mostly it's quite a broad kind of open park space with a variety of trees, some areas which are a bit wilder, which are left uncut. And then we've got the blue space. So this is Roger Stevens Pond. Roger Stevens is the lecture theatre behind, which you can see, which is the main lecture theatre space on the campus. It's 1960s brutalist. It's an incredibly kind of strange building, actually. It's like the staircases are like something out of an Escher painting. And this pond is actually the cooling system of the block of lectures. But that cooling system has been turned into a really quite lovely pond, which has got quite a lot of greenery within it. There's often a heron, there's a duck house, you can see ducks on the picture just here. So it's quite kind of a nice relaxing space, and there's seating around it as well. And then the final space that we looked at is the Parkinson Steps. Now, if you're familiar with the University of Leeds at all, or even our logo, you'll see that the Parkinson Tower is the logo of the University of Leeds. So it's really very symbolic of the university. But it's at the edge of campus, it's very grey, and it's facing out onto a very busy road, which is full of buses and cars, and it's not particularly kind of relaxing, I guess, is the thing. And that will come through in the data, which I'll show you shortly. So what we did is we had QR codes, which were available in each of these 4 spaces, which linked to different questionnaires, which were targeted about the places. So we asked students to complete questionnaires in these spaces. So the survey looked at quantitative measures of well-being. We used the Imperial College Wellbeing Survey, which I expect Luke talked about earlier. I'm afraid I missed his talk. Sense of belonging, place attachment, and we asked the participants to note the standout features of the locations. So what is it that they can see about the location? What do they feel about it? We also used a qualitative 10 words question. So this is a method from ARN. And this asks participants to write about the 10 words that come to mind when thinking about their sense of belonging in that space. And ARN reports that this produces a number of different sorts of senses of belonging. So there's a social sense of belonging, there's an academic sense of belonging, there's kind of a personal sense of belonging. And so we were looking to see if we found these same sorts of senses of belonging in these different spaces. So this is the results that we found. So these are word clouds which relate to that 10 words question. So we put the words that people said from that into a word cloud to see which words came out different in those different spaces. And Parkinson's steps, which is our grey space, busy is the principal word that comes out, but also community and students. So it's really a place that kind of people feel as being university-wise. They perceive that it's a studenty place, but it's busy, it's kind of grand, it's not a kind of a soft, relaxing space compared with the other spaces. So in all of the green spaces, calm was obviously one of the words that came out very much so. St George's Field, which as I said is that disused cemetery, it's open, nature, green, so people are really perceiving the greenness of the space here. So Roger Stevens Pond, which is the blue space, again, it's peaceful and it's calm. It's quite interesting that this is seen as this peaceful and calm space. At this point in time, most of the lectures and things at the University of Leeds were still being conducted online. I think we had a small number of things were coming back into in person, but they were much reduced in terms of the size. I think now that we're back to more full programs of lectures in person, this might be slightly less calm because you get a lot of foot throw through this area. But people are perceiving the nature and the peaceful aspects of this space. The sustainability garden, again, calm is coming through, also nature. Another of the things that happened over lockdown was that we got an influx of rabbits into the university. And so you kind of get that coming through in some of the words that are used here as well, where people talk about nature and getting this idea that there is actually some variety of sustainable biodiversity within the areas. In terms of what we found predicted that higher sense of belonging, location was important. And what we found was that the Parkinson's steps had a lower sense of belonging than the other three areas. So the green areas did promote a higher sense of belonging. Additionally, we found that place attachment and well-being were associated with the student's sense of belonging, but that was independent of the place. So where people felt a place attachment and they felt well-being, that was a predictor of sense of belonging, but then the place added on over and above that. So that suggests that these sustainable spaces are important in terms of students developing a sense of belonging. So the conclusions we had is that green spaces are important, and having green spaces on campus is going to be important for helping students feel like it's a space that belongs to them. Well-being doesn't vary by location, which is what we would expect because it's something which is a little bit more long-lasting, it's much less transitive. And this suggests that really we need to be protecting and signposting the green spaces to our students because it helps in terms of biodiversity and sustainability agendas, but it also helps the students' sense of belonging. There's a link to the paper there if you are interested, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Pam. This is quite interesting. Everyone, if you have questions for Pam regarding the research, please feel free to add them in the chat box. And we will follow the program. I will now introduce Laura Loyola. Laura, are you there? Hi, Laura, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So I will introduce you to Laura. Laura Loyola Hernandez is a feminist geographer at the University of Leeds. She is also a Light Fellow with the Leeds Institute for Teaching Excellence. She has an interest in decolonial thought, feminist political geography, critical race studies, policing, migrant rights, and social media activism with a focus on Latin America and the UK. Her research and teaching is based on a feminist decolonial practice. She is also interested on the impact of critical pedagogies and scholar activism within university settings. Welcome,
Right.
Laura. The floor is yours.
Gracias, Karen. Can you see my screen, hopefully?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. Right, so hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining and staying for the second panel. And I'd like to thank the two earlier presenters because I find like what they talked about kind of culminates with my presentation. So thanks so much for that. So I want to give the theoretical and methodological aspect of the project because I think that's really important to understand the results. And then I will talk about the results in of themselves, right? So the project is part of the Leeds Institute for Teaching Excellence fellowships that run through, in this case, 12 months. I started to do research in January, so I'm currently now in the writing up stages. And what I'm going to present today is part of a article that I'm hopefully submitting this week on the results of this project. So any feedback, questions, comments, I would really, really appreciate as well. Okay, so the project is based on what I call community-led pedagogies. But what is that? And kind of what is the methodology and epistemology or the thought behind that? And what do I mean by that? So two key elements of what I'm understanding of community-led pedagogies is this concept of hope and community itself. So when I talk about hope, I'm referring to hope as a pedagogical tool utilized by Paulo Freire and Bell Hooks, who see critical pedagogy, so the learning environment, the relationship between those that teach and students as a dynamic relationship between both of them. But it's also a tool to understand oppression and to overcome that oppression. So in this sense, hope becomes this pedagogical tool that allows us to think of, to reflect on these spaces and what that means and kind of generate these community spaces where we don't have to worry about, you know, the metrics that come with the neoliberal university of having to worry about assessment and how we're going to mark or grants or publications, but it's more about creating these pockets of hope and community building between students and staff, particularly those that are coming and emanating from marginalized communities. So that's why the project was really important that it focused on underrepresented students or who felt that they were underrepresented in the faculty of environment, which tends to be one of the widest kind of faculties across the university. So what are community-led pedagogies? So this is my kind of conceptual of what community-led pedagogies are, which are, as I said, they are co-created between students and staff, but also community that is beyond the physical space of the university, to create through different activities. So whether that's walks, whether that's workshops, whether that's panels, whether that's, you know, inviting the public within the university spaces. And as I said, creating these spaces where we don't have to worry about being assessed or having to assess, but it's about creating these spaces with music, with food that allows us to reflect on a particular subject in hand. And this is what I hopefully did throughout the project. So the methodology. So this is kind of the theoretical pinning. I didn't want to become too theoretical. So how does this relate to the methodology that I used? I really wanted to focus on the embodiment of knowledge by students and how students created through their body and through the actual producing of material, how they understood the university as a space of belonging, but also exclusion. And this is kind of the wider context of the university as we know it, at least in the UK, of an increasing of tuition fees, of having to have more students in the classroom. So this creates a sense of unbelonging, as you're going to see in the results, where there's a sea of students where they might know who their lecturers are, but we don't know who they are because they're just simply too many of them. And this, on top of students that feel underrepresented, really has an impact of how they understand the university, not only physically, but also metaphorically, of that sense of belonging that ultimately affects, you know, how they do at university. It affects their retention and their progression and other networks that they might generate or not to get another job, for example. So I'm seeing students from this perspective as knowledge producers themselves, and how their bodies and their lived experience at university of being underrepresented is not only powerful, but generates this knowledge that we kind of created together. So the project consisted of 3 phases. The first kind of phase was a workshop and a focus group. The second one was a further workshop. And then phase 3 was community activities, which involved kind of inviting people, outside participants that had explicitly participated in the workshops and the focus group. So it was basically open to anyone in Leeds and beyond that wanted to join as well. So for the methods that I used mixed methods. I didn't want to do like interviews or just focus groups, just guided with questions. As I said, I really wanted to encapsulate students as knowledge producers. And the way in which I did that was using all these type of methodologies. But today, specifically for this presentation, I'm going to focus on 2 methodologies that I used, which is body mapping, which is one of the presenters already discussed about cuerpo territorio. This is a feminist technique used by collectives in Latin America to understand the relationship between body and territory, but particularly around the environment, and considering different forms of oppression that are lived through the body and connected to territory. So I was really interested in applying this methodology within students. And also we use Legos, and it's called Lego Series Play. At the end, I'll show you a video of the university that these students want to create, because I asked them, what would your ideal university look like? And they literally built that out of Legos. And I'll show you that just to end. So this is just the body map activity that we did in the workshop with students, and I'll talk about that, but I really wanted to kind of show, it's really one of the things that I'm finding really difficult is when I present this is how can I translate all the amazing stuff that students generated in that are 3-dimensional through the screen. It's really difficult. But so for example, this map is, you know, the size of my body, for example. And this is an activity that the students did together. I just had music and food for them, and I just kind of had these questions that I prompted, and I left them. I didn't want to be there kind of as an observer, but then I would come back depending on if they finished a question. So they would walk me through what they had you know, written, and it generated conversation. And that way they were guiding me through their kind of knowledge production versus me. So what the body map, so I'll show you in this one, you'll see that there's a lot of writing and pictures. And I think this is a really realistic metaphor of the space of the university as both a site of exclusion, but hope and community building. And I'll show you these kind of contradictions that emerge in the body map. This is a quote from one of the students while we were doing the activity, and it says, the university will still invite like fossil fuel companies to come like advertise like jobs at career fairs. And then we're learning about how they're literally burning the planet, right? So on the one hand, you have the push from universities around sustainable curriculum and green spaces, but at the other, you know, they're being quite critical, like students are becoming more and more critical about university ties with fossil fuel companies, for example. This is also expressed. So this is a picture that I took in, I believe it was around October or November. So at Leeds, at the time that this graffiti happened, the context is that the mural had recently been finished, and it's a mural that supposedly is about sustainability and the role that the university has in kind of promoting these goals. But during the same time, there was a student occupation in one of the new buildings, and their only demand was that the university make a pledge to not have fossil fuel companies come to career fairs and to try to divest from fossil fuels. And this was a graffiti that was put within the university while this occupation was taking place, which again kind of shows these contradictions that I'm talking about, and that has a really impact on students, particularly students in the Faculty of Environment who are doing careers around sustainability, you know, and improving the environment as well. So one of the ways in which the project tried to create these pockets of hope, which I call them, and community spaces, was that towards the end of the project, the theme around sustainability and climate change become really central to what students were talking about. So I organized a panel, and we'll have Penelope, who's a researcher in Durham, and we did our PhD together in Cambridge. And she had just released this short documentary around a women-led collective in Bolivia who was trying to resist fossil fuel companies basically entering their territory. By the way, you can find it on YouTube with subtitles in Spanish and English, and I'll put the link in a bit. And then we have Andy, who's a PhD student and a feminist activist from the School of Geography. And we have Sai Murray, who's a community activist in Leeds as well, who works around reparations and climate change. So this is just one way in which the project hoped to kind of create these dialogues. And we had students come in from, you know, we had people come in that weren't even in the university, and it generated a really lovely space to talk about these contradictions and kind of our complicity within these contradictions, but also ways in which we can kind of think through these contradictions. Another example of these contradictions is the effect of kind of the neoliberalization of the university within at least the UK. So this is a quote: marketization and commoditization of education. Feeling conflicted about learning to be critical with capital system, but then having to work in the system when you graduate to be successful. Okay, and you can kind of see this quote as well. This was part of the body mapping activity, and they put all of these contradictions in the belly of the body, which kind of shows again kind of that discomfort that brings being in these spaces, because as underrepresented students, they're also told, like, if you make it here, you know, your future will be secured, but at the same time, really trying to think through those tension points that come with being at the university. And again, one of the ways in which I tried to kind of create these pockets of hope and community spaces was through inviting students to and paying for students. And we took this walk. This is Joe. He's Black Heritage Corner, which is a Black-led grassroots organization that does walks around Black history in Leeds. And this one happened to be about the campus. So it was really a great experience having this lived experience with students on Black history and abolition in the university. So we walked around campus. So that was a really lovely experience. So I'm just going to quickly, because I don't know how much time I'll have to try to finish it up. So as the previous presentation discussed, nature is also really central to that sense of belonging that was discussed in the previous presentation. But I found different results from the previous presentation. And I don't know if there are, because these students felt underrepresented, they literally felt more exposed within these green areas. So for example, this is just kind of a quote around the university. Again, this is the sustainable garden that was mentioned, and they kind of felt like it was underused, but also they didn't know how to use it, but also they felt really like literally exposed. And they talked about having a place, a green space that they really felt kind of nurtured by nature, where they could just escape because of how they encounter the university. They might have like racist incidents. There was also talk about like discrimination around learning disabilities, and they felt like they couldn't go to these green spaces like the sustainability garden because they felt literally exposed, that they didn't have any cover where they could just go and relax and kind of reconnect with nature to refuel that. So yeah, and again, these kind of contradictions of the Roger Stevens pond, which is lovely and it's full of diversity, versus kind of as well as the St. George Fields, which was mentioned in the previous presentation, with Roger Stevens building, which I'll just, just to kind of wrap up. They really don't like Roger Stevens building. It's really cold, it's really uncomfortable. There's never an internet, and that really kind of affects your learning environment of not wanting to be there. So the contradiction of having this really awful space inside, whereas outside, they really love and enjoy the pond, and it feels that kind of sense of calm. So I'm just going to put this video, which is basically the university that the students built. How can we build a better alternative university? So it's a university that has affordable and good living accommodations for both staff and students. There's free transport to go around campus. Sustainability is promoted by a bike lending program. There was a whole discussion about whether they should have a VC and what that VC would look like. There's also like complete divestment from fossil fuel companies. It's a net zero campus. There's much more diversity represented by the sharks here. There's a food co-op where the product is grown in the different green areas of the university. And what was really interesting about this project was that students had to build everything from scratch. Like I literally took all the Lego pieces out. So they had to build all the little people. They had to build everything. And you can see it's much more diverse campus, but they still struggled to kind of think of those alternatives because they felt like they just didn't have the tools to think of, okay, how can we not have these tension points in the university where I don't feel like I'm one in the sea of many, particularly for underrepresented students, but also staff. So I'll leave it there because I don't know how I'm with time, but if people have any questions or comments, I would love to hear them. And yeah, thank you so much. I'm just going to stop sharing.
Laura, thank you so much. Muchas gracias. This was a great presentation. I am so interested about the body mapping and the playing with the Lego. This is amazing. For me as an architect, sounds great. Everyone, if you have a question for Laura, please feel free to add them in the chat box. I think we already have a couple of questions. But first, we will go to Marco de la Concha, our last speaker. Marco, welcome, bienvenido.
Can everybody can hear me well?
Is it okay if I introduce you, Marco?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Sure, please, go ahead.
Great. So Marco de la Concha, partner at ensamblearquitectura.com, an interior architecture firm in Mexico City, specializing in interiors for offices, residences, and retail spaces. He's the co-founder of Funnel Search MKT, delivering highly efficient online MKT through Google advertising tools, Google Ads partner for a certification program. Well-seasoned business consultant, mentor, and speaker with strong experience in commercial strategy, business development, and sales. 17 years of experience delivering effective solutions for brand communication and marketing at retail for global and local brand marketers, ranging from consumer products to services. More than 12 years of experience as college professor in marketing and design subjects. Marco, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Of course, all of my experience cannot be matched by all your expertise and your research background of all of you. So I'll just be humble and try to share just thoughts. I don't think that I have enough information or sustainable, or my observations are capable of sustaining themselves as much as yours, but still, I think hopefully it would give you just food for thought. This last semester, I made a very, it was not a research, it was just an observation about the new ways of companies and how they're coping with the new ways of work. So I will share some of my findings and my hypotheses of what I found, and what I think it could be a good thing to observe for you all researchers. So the emotional appropriation of second spaces. Just as a quick recap, I'm a very interesting subject. I'm an industrial designer. I have an MBA. I have a master's degree in marketing. And I just kind of a curious polymath. And I always try to start my presentations with a question. And the question for today is the individual who appropriates the space to work or study, or is the architecture that the one that causes that sense of belonging? So is us as designers promoting this, or is the user appropriating the places they decide to work? So just for starters, I would like to just have a little definition about what is a first, second, and third space. Ray Olderberg, in his book, The Great Good Place, he wrote about the third place and refers to it as the social surroundings that separate from the two usual environments that are the home and work. In the case of academy, well, it wouldn't be work, it would be the school, but still that's becoming the second place. So just to quickly think about these places, these second places, is I would like to make an observation about the behavior while actively developing the knowledge, since in this second spaces, regardless if it's home, work, or school, we will develop some kind of knowledge. And that would be a different and alternative definition about second spaces. And that second space, that it's not home, it's not the third space, it's just the place where people tend to work or study, regardless of being for these uses. It has been transformed by post-COVID pandemic, all the interaction, the technology, people changes in behavior, and the flexibility that everything that I mentioned allowed us to have. Just as a brief clarification, sometimes it's common that these two terms are interchanged and they're not the same. Being hybrid and being flexible are different things. Hybrid considers the physical space where we work or study, and this would be like being personal or remotely connected with work. And flexibility, it's much more about what day of the week, what schedule do we use, and what modality would we prefer to work alone or collaborate with our mates, with our teammates. So given this clarifications, I would like to share with you some things that I think that should be observed. I believe that we should observe if the individual performance is affected by the spaces they're working on or studying in. I think we should identify if they tend to make an act of appropriation in order to feel this sense of belonging about the specific place they're going to work in. I would like to stop in this point because this act of appropriation is one thing that I observed over the past 6 months, and is that regardless if the person works at home, works at the office, if it's a flexible place where they decide to work in their office, or even if it's a public space such as a co-working, a cafe, or even they're on vacations and just start working in a restaurant, in a table or in a bench, they tend to just place their things and make them their own so they can feel comfortable even for a while. That's what I'm talking about, this act of appropriation. It's like building a nest, regardless if it's going to be a definite nest, such as the place in their homes where they're going to work, or it's a very, very narrow, lasting nest, such as a corner in a coffee shop. But they tend to appropriate themselves of that space. And finally, I think if we as designers and architects could identify those similarities in the ways that people appropriate themselves of that space they're going to work in, we might be able to influence their sense of belonging. If regardless if it's in an office, at home, at a public space, while working or studying. I'm just back at this word / concept of nesting. And I asked this question over and over again: if the space appropriation is a journey for this individual to start feeling that they belong, just food for thought. And the reasons for this observation is, my conclusion is, as every business and academic organization are reorganizing social interaction in a post-pandemic era and returning to an in-person, hybrid, flexible, and activity-based working, there's a need to find spaces, how the spaces are used by these individuals and how they these spaces and the design of those spaces influence their mood, motivation, productivity, performance. And as Debra Cureton said, and I quote her, if this influence their happiness. And of course, as designers and architects, I think it would be important to find a way of help these individuals through our work to grasp those working spaces as their own and enhance their sense of belonging, because this sense of belonging does not only translates to belonging to a group, but also to the organization, regardless if it's a company, regardless if it's a family, or an academic institution. I was brief. I hope this information it's just food for thought. And if you would like to discuss it any further, please feel free to just post a question.
Thank you, Marco, for your presentation. Your questions are really interesting. Thank you so much. So if everyone agrees, we can start with the Q&A session. We do have a couple of questions in the chat box. So I'm going to start. We have 2 questions from Marie. Marie, are you there? Your questions are for Kansu. So I'm going to read the question. If you
I am there, yes.
Hi, Marie. Would you like me to read the question, or would you like to have a direct chat with Kansu?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to. Sorry, I'm just gonna put the video on. That's more lively. Yeah, I'm happy to read the questions or ask her the questions directly. I was just wondering, and that's perhaps more related to my PhD work than the one I currently presented. But I was wondering if there had been any resistance in relation to the relocation, which I expect there will have been. But I was wondering whether you thought that this had perhaps fed into a sense of belonging, thinking about how perhaps resistance sometimes can bring people together or sort of act as a magnifier for a sense of belonging. And the second question, I found really interesting the way you articulated belonging with social infrastructure, and that's also, definitely something that I could see being explored from the lens of green spaces. But I was wondering if some of those social infrastructures were being rebuilt, and again, if that was feeding into participant sense of belonging. Big question, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much for your questions, Marie. Actually, when I was listening to your presentation, I was thinking like maybe you could also read like social infrastructure, community gardens as social infrastructure, because there is a lot of literature on that, how community gardens, green spaces function, for people to socialize, for people, push them outside and you know, create a community and sense of belonging and so on. So I was definitely thinking that in your presentation. I mean, I don't know if this is interesting for you. Yeah, I mean, you know, when it comes to Hasan Keyf, there was definitely a huge resistance. It was international resistance, actually. But I mean, it's not because of the relocation, it's because of they don't want the space to die. Because they say after this, I mean, the Hasan Keyf is flooded, we no longer have a place to belong, you know. And if someone comes and asks me, where do I belong? I'm going to say, I belong underwater, for instance. I come from underwater. So it is, first thing, this one maybe is related to, of course, sense of belonging, being flooded, everything, the memories, history, culture, and so on. And secondly, the value of heritage, the value of historical importance, archaeological importance of the space. And that, you know, based on this indigenous practices and knowledge, like 1,000 years ago, they, you know, accumulated, and they don't want to lose this thing, you know, they don't want to lose it. So there was a huge resistance, but unfortunately, dam was built. And yeah, in this paper, I argue that, I mean, if it is interesting for you, but these indigenous social infrastructures, I first, you know, define a bit like why they are important based on the literature. And for me, people construct identity, sense of identity and belonging, and place attachments through these infrastructures. So they're highly important for these people, you know. And I think these two phenomena are closely related for further research as well.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, if you have, you know, if you ask further information or anything like sources and so on, I'm happy to, you know, share and exchange knowledge.
Definitely.
Thank you both. Marie, I see we have another question from you, this one for Pam.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to take all the space.
I can read the question for you if you want. So Pam, do you think students' sense of belonging is defined differently in green spaces than it is in other spaces on campus?
I mean, it might be. I think, you know, as there's been a theme running through the presentations this, you know, today, quite what belonging is slightly mysterious. You know, some people define it as feeling welcome, other people define it in other ways. And I think it's possible that the students who were in the Parkinson Steps in that kind of very urban environment might feel belonging in a different way to those in the green spaces that we looked at. All we can really say is from looking at our data, the ways that belonging was felt by our measurements, which, you know, being quantitative, are never quite as rich as those that we might get from qualitative. So possibly, and that's something we could look at a little bit more.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you, Marie, for adding your question to the chat box. So we have more questions. This one is from Maha Saman. And our two questions again for Kansu. It says, in your interaction with the relocated people, were there differences in the perceptions of the new urban development between old and young children, youth versus older generation? Second, regarding body mapping methodology. Okay, this is for Laura, I think. Okay, Kansu, if you can help us answer the question, the first question, please.
Yeah, but the second, hi, thank you very much for this workshop. Now, the second question is also for Kansu. She also talked about body mapping.
Yeah, but I guess also Laura can also answer. I think it's also related to her, no?
Okay.
I mean, we both can answer because I really enjoy her presentation as well.
Yes.
And thank you very much for your questions. So yes, definitely. I mean, when people, you know, move into the resettlement, especially older generations suffered more. This sense of belonging. There are also research on that, like how older generations got affected from this urban regeneration practices. And these, I mean, they are the ones severely affected, I must say, because imagine all of your life spent in one place, and then suddenly there is a change, and you never even went outside of the city. I mean, these people are closely attached to nature, their land, their territory, you know, their culture. And for instance, I remember one older lady told me, I feel like a Syrian refugee here. Like, I never been outside of Hasankeyf, and now I feel like a Syrian refugee. I don't belong anywhere. So, I mean, this is very, you know, important. This is very, you know, sad about to hear this. And when it comes to children, children had, as far as I didn't work per se with children, like one-to-one, but I heard like from families, children tend to blame the father figure in the family to be in the resettlement. Like the children were saying like, oh, we need, why we are here, let's go back home, why we are here. And then they blame the father. They blame the father that because of you, these things happen. So this is a very also interesting point of view, you know, from the children. And maybe further research can also look children, I don't know. And when it comes to younger generation, they're the closer ones to adapt more, because they are very open also with the, you know, this globalization and you know, urbanization processes. They are the ones going to the university and so on. They interact with more outside environments, so their experience is also different. But still, when it comes to, at the end of the day, I mean, they also feel, you know, something missing in the resettlement. And regarding body mapping methodology, I don't know actually. I don't know how to use further, but I was thinking to use it as also with males, you know, with other marginalized groups. This can be, I don't know, children. Actually, children. There are also works done with children and body mapping in the literature, and it's a very great deal to actually communicate with children than asking them questions. So the further use maybe could be to interact with children. But yeah, I hope that this answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you both. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. I'm asking again, anyone wants to ask something else to one of our speakers before we wrap up? Okay, then Professor Jihan, if you agree, we can do the closing remarks and taking a group picture from everyone.
Yes, yeah, go ahead with the closing remarks if you wish. Yeah, and let's take a picture. If everybody can just open your cameras, please.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Professor Salim, for this opportunity. I wasn't quite aware of how difficult it would be to organize a seminar, but I have learned a lot during the past months. Thank you for our keynote speakers, Louise Banahene, Dr. Luke McCrone, and Dr. Debra. Thank you so much for your patience. You've been a big part of this. Thank you to every one of our speakers. I know a lot of you were quite nervous. I know you're quite busy, but thank you for being here. Thank you for the Architecture and Urbanism Research Group for being here as well. And to Dr. Meng Li, who is always behind the scenes helping with everything and the logistics. Thank you so much. And yeah, as you know, the Architecture and Urbanism Research Group will be hosting the 5th seminar coming soon. We will be letting you know in our social media. And of course, the recording of the seminar will be in our YouTube channel. So you will receive all the information via email. And thank you so much for being here. It was my pleasure, and it was such a live experience for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone, and hope to see you again in forthcoming events. Thanks a lot.